Chapter 26 of Tante. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Dion Gines, Salt Lake City, Utah. Tante by Anne Douglas Sedgwick. Chapter 26. The telephone sounded while Gregory next morning ate his solitary breakfast, and the voice of Mrs. Forrester, disembodied of all but its gravity, asked him, if he would, to come and see her immediately. Gregory asked if Madame von Marwitz were with her. He was not willing, after the final affront that she had put upon him, to encounter Madame von Marwitz again in circumstances where he might seem to be justifying himself. But with a deeper drop, the disembodied voice informed him that Madame von Marwitz, 10 minutes before, had driven to the station on her way to Cornwall. "You will understand, I think, Gregory," said Mrs. Forrester, "that it is hardly possible for her to face in London, as yet, the situation that you have made for her." Gregory, to this, replied shortly that he would come to her at once, reserving his comments on the imputed blame. He had passed an almost sleepless night, lying in his little dressing-room bed where, by a tacit agreement, never explicitly recognized, he had slept now for so many nights. Cold fears, shaped at last in definite forms, stood round him and bade him see the truth. His wife did not love him. From the beginning he had been as nothing to her compared with her guardian. The pale, hard light of her eyes, as she had said to him that afternoon, "Speak," seemed to light the darkness with bitter revelations. He knew that he was what would be called sentimentally a broken-hearted man, but it seemed that the process of breaking had been gradual, so that now, when his heart lay in pieces, his main feeling was not of sharp pain, but of dull fatigue; not of tragic night, but of a grey commonplace from which all sunlight had slowly ebbed away. He found Mrs. Forrester in her morning-room among loudly singing canaries and pots of jonquils, and as he shook hands with her he saw that this old friend, so old and so accustomed that she was like a part of his life, was embarrassed. The wrinkles on her withered but oddly juvenile face seemed to have shifted to a pattern of perplexity and pained resolution. He was not embarrassed, though he was beaten, and done in a way Mrs. Forrester could not guess at, yet he felt an awkwardness. They had known each other for a lifetime, he and Mrs. Forrester, but they were not intimate. And how intimate they would have to become if they were to discuss with anything like frankness the causes and consequences of Madame von Marwitz's conduct. A gloomy indifference settled on Gregory as he realized that her dear friend's conduct was the one factor in the causes and consequences that Mrs. Forrester would not be able to appraise at its true significance. She shook his hand, and seating herself at a little table and slightly tapping it with her fingers, "Now, my dear Gregory," she said, "will you, please, tell me why you have acted like this?" "Isn't my case prejudged?" Gregory asked, reconstructing the scene that must have taken place last night when Madame von Marwitz had appeared before her friend. "No, Gregory, it is not," Mrs. Forrester returned with some terseness, for she felt his remark to be unbecoming. "I hope to have some sort of explanation from you." "I am quite ready to explain, but it's hardly possible that my explanation will satisfy you," said Gregory. "You spoke just now, when you called me up, of a situation, and said I'd made it. My explanation can only consist in saying that I didn't make it, that Madame von Marwitz made it, that she came to us in order to make it, and then to fix the odium of it on me." Already Mrs. Forrester had flushed. She looked hard at the pot of jonquils near her. "You really believe that?" "I do. She can't forgive me for not liking her," said Gregory. "And you don't like her. You own to it." "I don't like her. I own to it," Gregory replied with a certain frosty relief. It was like taking off damp, threadbare garments that had chilled one for a long time, and facing the winter wind, naked but invigorated. "I dislike her very much." "May I ask why?" Mrs. Forrester inquired, with careful courtesy. "I distrust her," said Gregory. "I think she's dangerous, and tyrannous, and unscrupulous. I think that she's devoured by egotism. I'm sorry, but if you ask me why, I can only tell you." Mrs. Forrester sat silent for a moment, and then, the flush on her delicate old cheek deepening, she murmured, "It is worse, far worse, than Mercedes told me. Even Mercedes didn't suspect this. Gregory, I must ask you another question. Do you really imagine that you and your cruel thoughts of her would be of the slightest consequence to Mercedes Okraska if you had not married the child for whose happiness she holds herself responsible? Of course not. She wouldn't give me another thought if I weren't there in her path. I am in her path, and she feels that I don't like her, and she hasn't been able to let me alone. She has not let you alone because she hoped to make your marriage secure in the only way in which security was possible for you and Karen. What happiness could she see for Karen's future if she were to have cut herself apart from her life, dropped you and Karen with you? That doubtless would have been the easy thing to do. There is indeed no reason why women like Mercedes Okraska, women with the world at their feet, should trouble to think of the young men they may chance to meet, whose exacting moral sense they don't satisfy. I am glad you see that," said Mrs. Forrester, tapping her table. "It would have been far kinder to have dropped Karen than deliberately to set to work, as she has done, to ruin her happiness. She hasn't been able to keep her hands off it. She couldn't stand it. A happiness she hadn't given. A happiness for which gratitude wasn't due to her." "Gregory, Gregory," Mrs. Forrester raised her eyes to him now. "You are frank with me, very frank, and I must be frank with you. There is more than dislike here, and distrust, and morbid prejudice. There is jealousy. Hints of it have come to me. I have tried to put them aside. I've tried to believe, as my poor Mercedes did, that by degrees you would adjust yourself to the claims on Karen's life, and be generous and understanding, even when you had no spontaneous sympathy to give. But it is all quite clear to me now. You can't accept the fact of your wife's relation to Mercedes. You can't accept the fact of a devotion not wholly directed towards yourself. I've known you since boyhood, Gregory, and I've always had regard and fondness for you. But this is a serious breach between us. You seem to me more wrong and arrogant than I could trust myself to say. And you have behaved cruelly to a woman for whom my feeling is more than mere friendship. In many ways, my feeling for Mercedes Okraska is one of reverence. She is one of the great people of the world. To know her has been a possession, a privilege. Anyone might be proud to know such a woman. And when I think of what you have now said of her to me, when I think of how I saw her here last night, broken, crushed, after so many sorrows. Tears had risen to Mrs. Forrester's eyes. She turned her head aside. "Do you mean," said Gregory after a moment, in which it seemed to him that his grey world perceptibly, if slightly, darkened, "do you mean that I've lost your friendship because of Madame von Marwitz?" "I don't know, Gregory. I can't tell you," said Mrs. Forrester, not looking at him. "I don't recognize you. As to Karen, I cannot imagine what your position with her can be. How is she to bear it, when she knows that it is said that you insulted her guardian's friends, and then turned her out of your house?" "I didn't turn her out," said Gregory. He walked to the window and stared into the street. "She went, because that was the most venomous thing she could do, and I didn't insult her friends. You said to her that the man she had thought of as a husband for Karen was not a gentleman. You said that you did not understand how Mercedes could have chosen such a man for her. You said this with the child standing between you. Oh, you cannot deny it, Gregory. I have heard in detail what took place. Mercedes saw that unless she left you, Karen's position was an impossible one. It was to save Karen and your relation to Karen that she went." Gregory, still standing at the window, was silent, and then asked, Have you seen Herr Lippheim?" "No, Gregory," Mrs. Forrester returned, and now with trenchancy, the concrete case being easier to deal with openly. "No, I have not seen him, but Mercedes spoke to me about him last winter, when she hoped for the match, and told me, moreover, that she was surprised by Karen's refusal, as the child was much attached to him. I have not seen him, but I know the type, and intimately. He is a warm-hearted and intelligent musician." "Your bootmaker may be warm-hearted and intelligent." "That is petulant, almost an insolent simile, Gregory. It only reveals, pitifully, your narrowness and prejudice, and, I will add, your ignorance. Herr Lippheim is an artist, a man of character and significance. Many of my dearest friends have been such, hearts of gold, the salt of the world." "Would you have allowed a daughter of yours, may I ask, to marry one of these hearts of gold?" "Certainly, most certainly," said Mrs. Forrester, but with a haste and heat somewhat suspicious. "If she loved him." "If he were personally fit, you mean. Herr Lippheim is undoubtedly warm-hearted and, in his own way, intelligent, but he is as unfit to be Karen's husband as your bootmaker to be yours." They had come now, on this lower, easier level, to one of the points where temper betrays itself as it cannot do on the heights of contest. Gregory's reiteration of the bootmaker greatly incensed Mrs. Forrester. "My dear Gregory," she said, "I yield to no one in my appreciation of Karen. Owing to the education and opportunities that Mercedes has given her, she is a charming young woman. But since we are dealing with facts, the bare, bald, worldly aspect of things, we must not forget the facts of Karen's parentage and antecedents. Herr Lippheim is in these respects, I imagine, altogether her equal. A rising young musician, the friend and protégé of one of the world's great geniuses, and a penniless, illegitimate girl. Do not let your rancour, your jealousy, blind you so completely." Gregory turned from the window at this, smiling a pallid, frosty smile, and Mrs. Forrester was now aware that she had made him very angry. "I may be narrow," he said, "and conventional and ignorant, but I'm unconventional and clear-sighted enough to judge people by their actual, not their market value. Of Herr Lippheim I know nothing, except that his parentage and antecedents haven't made a gentleman, or anything resembling one, of him, while of Karen I know that hers, unfortunate as they certainly were, have made a lady, and a very perfect one. I don't forgive Madame von Marwitz for a great many things in regard to her treatment of Karen," Gregory went on with growing bitterness, "chief among them that she has taken her at the market value, and allowed her friends to do the same. I've been able, thank goodness, to rescue Karen, at all events, from that. Madame von Marwitz can't carry her about any longer like a badge from some charitable society on her shoulder. No woman who really loved Karen, or who really appreciated her," Gregory added, falling back on his concrete fact, "could have thought of Herr Lippheim as a husband for her." Mrs. Forrester sat looking up at him, and she was genuinely aghast. "You are incredible to me, Gregory," she said. "You set your 1 year of devotion to Karen against Mercedes' lifetime, and you presume to discredit hers." "Yes, I do. I don't believe in her devotion to Karen." "Do you realize that your attitude may mean a complete rupture between Karen and her guardian?" "No such luck, I'm afraid," said Gregory with a grim laugh. "My only hope is that it may mean a complete rupture between Madame von Marwitz and me. It goes without saying, feeling as I do, that if it wouldn't break Karen's heart, I'd do my best to prevent Madame von Marwitz from ever seeing her again." There was a little silence, and then Mrs. Forrester got up sharply. "Very well, Gregory," she said. "That will do." "Are you going to shake hands with me?" he asked, still with the grim smile. "Yes, I will shake hands with you, Gregory," Mrs. Forrester replied, "because, in spite of everything, I am fond of you. But you must not come here again. Not now." "Never any more? Do you really mean?" "Not until you are less wickedly blind." "I'm sorry," said Gregory. "It's never any more then, I'm afraid." He was very sorry. He knew that as he walked away. End of chapter 26. Chapter 27 of Tante. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Dion Gines, Salt Lake City, Utah. Tante by Anne Douglas Sedgwick. Chapter 27. Mrs. Forrester remained among her canaries and jonquils thinking. She was seriously perturbed. She was, as she had said, fond of Gregory, but was fonder far of Mercedes von Marwitz, whom Gregory had caused to suffer, and whom he would evidently cause to suffer still more. She controlled the impulse to telephone to Eleanor Scrotton and consult with her. A vague instinct of loyalty towards Gregory restrained her from that. Eleanor would, in a day or two, hear from Cornwall, and what she would hear could not be so bad as what Mrs. Forrester herself could tell her. After thinking for the rest of the morning, Mrs. Forrester decided to go and see Karen. She was not very fond of Karen. She had always been inclined to think that Mercedes exaggerated the significance of the girl's devotion. And Gregory's exaggeration now of her general significance, explicable as it might be in an infatuated young husband, disposed her the less kindly towards her. She felt that Karen had been clumsy, dull, in the whole affair. She felt that at bottom she was somewhat responsible for it. How had Gregory been able, living with Karen, to have formed such an insensate conception of Mercedes? The girl was stupid, acquiescent. She had shown no tact, no skill, no clarifying courage. Mrs. Forrester determined to show them all, to talk to Karen. She drove to St. James's at 4:00 that afternoon, and Barker told her that Mrs. Jardine was in the drawing-room. Visitors evidently were with her, and it affected Mrs. Forrester very unpleasantly, as Barker led her along the passage, to hear rich harmonies of music filling the flat. She had expected to be perhaps ushered into a darkened bedroom, to administer comfort and sympathy to a shattered creature, before administering reproof and counsel. But Karen not only was up, she was not alone. The strains were those of chamber music, and a half-perplexed delight mingled with Mrs. Forrester's displeasure as she recognized the heavenly melodies of Schumann's pianoforte quintet. The performers were in the third movement. Karen rose, as Barker announced her, from the side of a stout lady at the piano, and Mrs. Forrester, nodding, her finger at her lips, dropped into a chair and listened. The stout lady at the piano had a pale, fat, pear-shaped face, her grizzled hair parted above it and twisted to a large, outstanding knob behind. She wore eyeglasses and peered through them at her music with intelligent intensity and profound humility. The violin was played by an enormous young man with red hair, and the viola, second violin, and cello by 3 young women, all of the black and tan Semitic type. Mrs. Forrester was too much preoccupied with her wonder to listen as she would have wished to, but by the time the end of the movement was come, she had realized that they played extremely well. Karen came forward in the interval. She was undoubtedly pale and heavy-eyed, but in her little dress of dark blue silk, with her narrow lawn ruffles and locket and shining hair, she showed none of the desperate signs appropriate to her circumstances, nor any embarrassment at the incongruous situation in which Mrs. Forrester found her. "This is Frau Lippheim, Mrs. Forrester," she said, "and these are Fräulein Lotta and Minna and Elizabeth, and this is Herr Franz. I think you have often heard Tante speak of our friends." Her ears buzzing with the name of Lippheim since the night before, Mrs. Forrester was aware that she showed confusion. Also that for a brief, sharp instant, while her eyes rested on Herr Franz, A pang of perverse sympathy for Gregory, in a certain aspect of his wickedness, disintegrated her state of mind. He was singular looking indeed, this untidy young man, whose ill-kept clothes had a look of insecurity, like arrested avalanches on a mountain. "No, I can feel for Gregory somewhat in this," Mrs. Forrester said to herself. "We are having some music, you see," said Karen. "Herr Lippheim promised me yesterday that they would all come and play to me. Can you stay and listen for a little while? They must go before tea, for they have a rehearsal for their concert," she added, as though to let Mrs. Forrester know that she was not unconscious of the matter that must have brought her. There was really no reason why she shouldn't stay. She could not very well ask to have the Lippheims and their instruments turned out. Moreover, she was very fond of the quintet. Mrs. Forrester said that she would be glad to stay. When they went on to the fourth movement, and while she listened, giving her mind to the music, Mrs. Forrester's disintegration slowly recomposed itself. It was not only that the music was heavenly, and that they played so well. She liked these people. They were the sort of people she had always liked. She forgot Herr Franz's uncouth and mountainous aspect, his great head leaning sideways, his eyes half closed, with the musician's look of mingled voluptuous rapture, and cold, grave, listening intellect. He had a certain majesty. The mother, too, all devout concentration, was an artist of the right sort. The girls had the gentle benignity that comes of sincere self-dedication. They pleased Mrs. Forrester greatly, and, as she listened, her severity towards Gregory shaped itself anew and more forcibly. Narrow, blind, bigoted young man. And it was amusing to think, as a comment on his fierce consciousness of Herr Lippheim's unfitness, that here Herr Lippheim was, admitted to the very heart of Karen's sorrow. It was inconceivable that anyone but very near and dear friends should have been tolerated by her today. Karen, too, after her fashion, was an artist. The music, no doubt, was helpful to her. Soft thoughts of her great, lacerated friend, speeding now towards her solitudes, filled Mrs. Forrester's eyes more than once with tears. They finished, and Frau Lippheim, rubbing her hands with her handkerchief, stood smiling near-sightedly, while Mrs. Forrester expressed her great pleasure and asked all the Lippheims to come and see her. She planned already a musical. Karen's face showed a pale beam of gladness. "And now, my dear child," said Mrs. Forrester, when the Lippheims had departed, and she and Karen were alone, and seated side by side on the sofa, "we must talk. I have come, of course, you know, to talk about this miserable affair." She put her hand on Karen's, but already something in the girl's demeanour renewed her first displeasure. She looked heavy. She looked phlegmatic. There was no response, no softness in her glance. "You have perhaps a message to me, Mrs. Forrester, from Tante?" she said. "No, Karen, no," Mrs. Forrester with irrepressible severity returned. "I have no message for you. Any message, I think, should come from your husband, and not from your guardian." Karen sat silent, her eyes moving away from her visitor's face and fixing themselves on the wall above her head. The impulse that had brought Mrs. Forrester was suffering alterations. Gregory had revealed the case to her as worse than she had supposed. Karen emphasized the revelation. And what of Mercedes between these two young egoists? "I must ask you, Karen," she said, "whether you realize how Gregory has behaved to the woman to whom you and he owe so much." Karen continued to look fixedly at the wall, and after a moment of deliberation replied, "Tante did not speak rightly to Gregory, Mrs. Forrester. She lost her temper very much. You know that Tante can lose her temper." Mrs. Forrester, at this, almost lost hers. "You surprise me, Karen. Your husband had spoken insultingly of her friends, and yours, to her. Why attempt to shield him? I heard the whole story in detail from your guardian, you must remember." Again Karen withdrew into a considering silence, But though her face remained impassive, Mrs. Forrester observed that a slight flush rose to her cheeks. "Gregory did not intend Tante to overhear what he said," she produced at last. "It was said to me, and I had questioned him, not to her. Tante came in by chance. It is not likely, Mrs. Forrester, that my version would differ in any way from hers." "You mustn't take offense at what I say, Karen." Mrs. Forrester spoke with more severity. "Your version does differ. To my astonishment, you seem actually to defend your husband." "Yes, and from what is not true. That is not to differ from Tante as to what took place." Karen brought her eyes to Mrs. Forrester's. "From what is not true? Very well. You will not deny that he so intensely dislikes your guardian, and has shown it so plainly to her, that she has had to leave you. You will not deny that, Karen?" "No, I will not deny that," Karen replied. "My poor child, it is true, and it is only a small part of the truth. I don't know what Gregory has said to you in private, but even Mercedes had not prepared me for what he said to me this morning." "What did he say to you this morning, Mrs. Forrester?" "He believes her to be a bad woman, Karen. Do you realize that? Has he told you that? Can you bear it? Dangerous, unscrupulous, tyrannous, devoured by egotism, were the words he used of her. I shall not forget them. He accused her of hypocrisy in her feeling for you. He hoped that you might never see her again. It is terrible, Karen, terrible. It puts us all of us who love Mercedes, and you through her, into the most impossible position." Karen sat, her head erect, her eyes downcast, with a rigidity of expression almost torpid. "Do you see the position he puts us in, Karen?" Mrs. Forrester went on with insistence. "Have you had the matter out with Gregory? Did you realize its gravity? I must really beg you to answer me." "I have not yet spoken with my husband," said Karen, in a chill, lifeless tone. "But you will? You cannot let it pass." "No, Mrs. Forrester, I will not let it pass." "You will insist that he shall make a full apology to Mercedes?" "Is he to apologize to her for hating her?" Karen, at this, asked suddenly. "For hating her? What do you mean?" Mrs. Forrester was taken aback. "If he is to apologize," said Karen, in a still colder, still more lifeless voice, "it must be for something that can be changed. How can he apologize to her for hating her if he continues to hate her?" "He can apologize for having spoken insultingly to her." "He has not done that. It was Tante who overheard what she was not intended to hear, and it was Tante who spoke with violence." "It amazes me to hear you put it on her shoulders, Karen. He can apologize then for what he has said to me," said Mrs. Forrester with indignation. "You will not deny that what he said of her to me was insulting." "He is to tell her that he has said those words and then apologize, Mrs. Forrester? Oh, no, you do not think what you say." "Really, my dear Karen, you have a most singular fashion of speaking to a person 3 times your age," Mrs. Forrester exclaimed, the more incensed for the confusion of thought into which the girl's persistence threw her. "The long and short of it is that he must make it possible for Mercedes to meet him with decency in the future." "But I do not know how that can be," said Karen, rising as Mrs. Forrester rose. "I do not know how Tante now can see him. If he thinks these things and does not say them, there may be pretense. But if he says them to Tante's friends, how can there be pretense?" There was no appeal in her voice. She put the facts, so evident to herself, before her visitor, and asked her to look at them. Mrs. Forrester was suddenly aware that her advice might have been somewhat hasty. She also felt suddenly as though, on a reconnoitering march down a rough but open path, she found herself merging in the gloomy mysteries of a forest. There were hidden things in Karen's voice. "Well, well," she said, taking the girl's hand and casting about in her mind for a retreat. "That's to see it as hopeless, isn't it? And we don't want to do that, do we? We want to bring Gregory to reason, and you are the person best fitted to do that. We want to clear up these dreadful ideas he has got into his head, heaven knows how. And no one but you can do it. No one in the world, my dear Karen, is more fitted than you to make him understand what our wonderful Tante really is. There is the trouble, Karen, said Mrs. Forrester, finding now the original clue with which she had started on her expedition. He shouldn't have been able, living with you, seeing your devotion, seeing from your life, as you must have told him of it, what it was founded on. He shouldn't have been able to form such a monstrous conception of our great, dear one. You have been in fault there, my dear. You see it now, I am sure. At the first hint, you should have made things clear to him. I know that it is hard for a young wife to oppose the man she loves, but love mustn't make us cowardly. Mrs. Forrester murmured on more cheerfully as they moved down the passage. And Gregory will only love you more wisely and deeply if he is made to recognize, once for all, that you will not sacrifice your guardian to please him. They were now at the door, and Karen had not said a word. Well, good-bye, my dear, said Mrs. Forrester. Oddly, she did not feel able to urge more strongly upon Karen that she should not sacrifice her guardian to her husband. I hope I've made things clearer by coming. It was better that you should realize just what your guardian's friends felt and would feel about it, wasn't it? Karen still made no reply, and on the threshold Mrs. Forrester paused to add with some urgency, "It was right. You see that, don't you, Karen? That you should know what Gregory is really feeling?" "Yes," Karen now assented. "It is better that I should know that." End of chapter 27. Chapter 28 of Tante. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Dion Gines, Salt Lake City, Utah. Tante by Anne Douglas Sedgwick. Chapter 28. Gregory, when he came in that evening, thought at first, with a pang of fear, that Karen had gone out. It was time for dressing, and she was not in their room. In the drawing-room it was dark. He stood in the doorway for a moment and looked about it, sad and tired and troubled, wondering if Karen had gone to Mrs. Forrester's, wondering whether in her grave displeasure with him she had even followed her guardian. And then from beside him came her voice. "I am here, Gregory. I have been waiting for you." His relief was so intense that, turning up the lights, seeing her sitting there on a little sofa near the door, he bent involuntarily over her to kiss her. But her hand put him away. "No, I must speak to you," she said. Gregory straightened himself, compressing his lips. Karen had evidently not thought of changing. She wore her dark blue silk dress. She had, indeed, been sitting there since Mrs. Forrester went. He looked about the room, noting, with dull wonder, the grouped chairs and open piano. "You have had people here?" "Yes, the Lippheims came and played to me. I would have written to them and told them not to come, but I forgot. And Mrs. Forrester has been here." "Quite a reception," said Gregory. He walked to the window and looked out. "Well," he said, not turning to his wife, "what have you to say to me, Karen?" His tone was dry and even ironic. "Mrs. Forrester came to tell me," said Karen, "that you had seen her this morning." "Yes. Well?" "And she told me," Karen went on, "that you had a great deal to say to her about my guardian, things that you have never dared to say to me." He turned to her now, and her eyes from across the room fixed themselves upon him. "I will say them to you if you like," said Gregory after a moment. He leaned against the side of the window and folded his arms. And he examined his wife with, apparently, the cold attention that he would have given to a strange witness in the box. And, indeed, she was strange to him. Over his aching and dispossessed heart he steeled himself in an impartial scrutiny. "It is true, then," said Karen, "that you believe her tyrannous and dangerous and unscrupulous, and that you think her devoured by egotism and hypocritical in her feeling for me, and that you hope that I may never see her again?" She catalogued the morning's declarations accurately, like the witness giving unimpeachable testimony. But it was rather absurd to see her as the witness, when, so unmistakably, she considered herself the judge and him the criminal in the dock. There was relief in pleading guilty to everything. "Yes, it's perfectly true," he said. She looked at him, and he could discover no emotion on her face. "Why did you not tell me this when you asked me to marry you?" she questioned. "Oh, I wasn't so sure of it then," said Gregory, "and I loved you, and hoped it would never come out. I didn't want to give you pain. That's why I never dared tell you, as you put it. You wanted to marry me, and you knew that if you told me the truth, I would not marry you. That is the reason you did not dare," said Karen. "Well, there's probably truth in that," Gregory assented, smiling. "I'm afraid I was an infatuated creature, perhaps a dishonest one. I can't expect you to make allowances for my condition, I know." She lowered her eyes and sat for so long in silence that presently, rather ashamed of the bitterness of his last words, he went on in a kinder tone. "I know that I can never make you understand. You have your infatuation and it blinds you. You've been blind to the way in which, from the very beginning, she has tracked me down. You've been blind to the fact that the thing that has moved her hasn't been love for you, but spite, malicious spite, against me for not giving her the sort of admiration she's accustomed to. If I've come to hate her, I didn't in the least at first, of course. It's only fair to say that she hates me 10 times worse. I only ask that she should let me alone." "And let me alone," said Karen, who had listened without a movement. "Oh, no," Gregory said, "that's not at all true. You surely will be fair enough to own that it's not, that I did everything I could to give you both complete liberty. As when you applauded and upheld Betty for her insolent interference. As when you complained to me of my guardian because she asked that I should have a wider life. As when you hoped to have Mrs. Talcott here so that my guardian might be kept out." "Did she suggest that?" "She showed it to me. I had not seen it even then. Do you deny it?" "No, I don't suppose I can, though it was nothing so definite. But I certainly hoped that Madame von Marwitz would not come here." "And yet you can tell me that you have not tried to come between us?" "Yes, I can. I never tried to come between you. I tried to keep away. It's been she, as I say, who has tracked me down. That was what I was afraid of when she came here, that she'd force me to show my dislike. Can you deny, Karen, I ask you this, that from the beginning she has made capital to you out of my dislike, and pointed it out to you?" "I will not discuss that with you," said Karen. "I know that you can twist all her words and actions." "I don't want to do that. I can see a certain justice in her malice. It was hard for her, of course, to find that you'd married a man she didn't take to, and who didn't take to her. But why couldn't she have left it at that?" "It couldn't be left at that. It wasn't only that," said Karen. "If she had liked you, you would never have liked her, and if you had liked her, she would have liked you." The steadiness of her voice, as she thus placed the heart of the matter before him, brought him a certain relief. Perhaps, in spite of his cold realizations and the death of all illusion as to Karen's love for him, they could really, now, come to an understanding, an accepted compromise. His heart ached, and would go on aching until time had blunted its hurts, and a compromise was all that he had to hope for. He had nothing to expect from Karen but acceptance of fact and faithful domesticity. But after all the uncertainties and turmoils, this bitter peace had its balms. He took up her last words. "Ah, well, she'd have liked my liking," he analyzed it. "I don't know that she'd have liked me, unless I could have managed to give her actual worship, as you and her friends do. But I'm not going to say anything more against her. She has forced the truth from me, and now we may bury it. You shall see her, of course, whenever you want to, but I hope that I shall never have to speak of her to you again." The talk seemed to have been brought to an end. Karen had risen, and Barker, entering at the moment, announced dinner. "By Jove! Is it as late as that?" Gregory muttered, nodding to him. He turned to Karen when Barker was gone, and the pink electric lights falling upon her face, he saw, as he had not seen before, how gray and sunken it was. She had made no movement towards the door. "Gregory," she said, fixing her eyes upon him, and he then saw that he had misinterpreted her quiet. "I tell you that these things are not true. They are not true. Will you believe me?" "What things?" he asked. But he was temporizing. He saw that the end had not come. "The things you believe of Tante, that she is a heartless woman, using those who love her, feeding on their love. I say it is not true. Will you believe me?" She stood on the other side of the room, her arms hanging at her sides, her hands hanging open, all her being concentrated in the ultimate demand of her compelling gaze. "Karen," he said, "I know that she must be lovable. I know, of course, that she has power and charm and tenderness. I think I can understand why you feel for her as you do, but I don't think that there is any chance that I shall change my opinion of her, not for anything you say. I believe she takes you in completely." Karen gazed at him. "You still believe that she is tyrannous and dangerous and false, whatever I may say?" "Yes, Karen. I know it sounds horrible to you. You must try to forgive me for it. We won't speak of it again, I promise you." She turned from him, looking before her at the Buddha, but not as if she saw it. "We shall never speak of it again," she said. "I am going to leave you, Gregory." For a moment he stared at her. Then he smiled. "You mustn't punish me for telling you the truth, Karen, by silly threats." "I do not punish you. You have done rightly to tell me the truth. But I cannot live with a man who believes these things." She still gazed at the Buddha, and again Gregory stared at her. His face hardened. "Don't be absurd, Karen. You cannot mean what you say." "I am going tonight. Now," said Karen. "Going? Where?" "To Cornwall. Back to my guardian. She will take care of me again. I will not live with you." "If you really mean what you say," said Gregory after a moment, "you are telling me that you don't love me. I've suspected it for some time." "I feel as if that were true," said Karen, looking now down upon the ground. "I think I have no more love for you. I find you a petty man." It was impossible to hope that she was speaking recklessly or passionately. She had come to the conclusion with deliberation. She had been thinking of it since last night. She was willing to cast him off because he could not love where she loved. How deeply the roots of hope still knotted themselves in him he was now to realize. He felt his heart and mind rock with the reverberation of the shattering, the pulverizing explosion, and he saw his life lying in a wilderness of dust about him. Yet the words he found were not the words of his despair. "Even if you feel like this, Karen," he said, "there is no necessity for behaving like a lunatic. Go and stay with your guardian, by all means, and whenever you like. Start tomorrow morning. Spend most of your time with her. I shall not put the smallest difficulty in your way. But, if only for your own sake, have some common sense and keep up appearances. You must remain my wife in name and the mistress of my house." "Thank you. You mean to be kind, I know," said Karen, who had not looked at him since her declaration. "But I am not a conventional woman, and I do not wish to live with a man who is no longer my husband. I do not wish to keep up appearances. I do not wish it to be said, by those who know my guardian and what she has done for me and been to me, that I keep up the appearance of regard for a man who hates her. I made a mistake in marrying you. You allowed me to make it. Now, as far as I can, I undo it by leaving you. Perhaps," she added, "you could divorce me. That would set you free." The remark in its childishness, callousness, and considerateness struck him as one of the most revealing she had made. He laughed icily. "Our laws only allow of divorce for one cause, and I advise you not to seek freedom for yourself, or for me, by disgracing yourself. It's not worth it. The conventions you scorn have their solid value." She had now turned her head and was looking at him. "I think you are insulting me," she said. For the first time he observed a trembling in her voice, and interpreted it as anger. It gave him a hurting satisfaction to have made her angry. She had appalled and shattered him. "I am not insulting you. I am warning you, Karen," he said. "A woman who can behave as you are behaving is capable of acts of criminal folly. You don't believe in convention, and in your guardian's world you will meet many men who don't." "What do you mean by criminal folly?" "I mean living with a man you're not married to." He had simply and sincerely forgotten something. Karen's face grew ashen. "You mean that my mother was a criminal?" Even at this moment of his despair, Gregory was horribly sorry. Yet the memory that she recalled brought a deeper fear for her future. He had spoken with irony of her suggestion about divorce and freedom. But did not her very blood, as well as her environment, give him reason to emphasize his warning? "I didn't mean that. I wasn't thinking of that," he said, "as you must know. And to be criminally foolish is a very different thing from being a criminal. But I'm convinced that to break social laws, and these laws about men and women have deeper than merely social sanctions, to break them, I'm convinced, can bring no happiness. I feel about your mother and what she did, I say it with all reverence, that she was as mistaken as she was unfortunate, and I beg of you, Karen, never to follow her example." "It is not for you to speak of her," Karen said, not moving from her place, but uttering the words with a still and sudden passion that he had never heard from her. "It is not for you to preach sermons to me on the text of my mother's misfortunes. I do not call them misfortunes, nor did she. I do not accept your laws, and she was not afraid of them. How dare you call her unfortunate? She lost nothing that she valued, and she gained great happiness, and gave it, for she was happy with my father. It was a truer marriage than any I have known. She was more married than you or I have ever been, or could ever have been, for there was deep love between them, and trust and understanding. Do not speak to me of her. I forbid it." She turned to the door. Gregory sprang to her side and seized her wrist. "Karen, where are you going? Wait till tomorrow," he exclaimed, fear for her actual safety surmounting every other feeling. She stood still under his hand and looked at him with her still passion of repudiation. "I will not wait. I shall go tonight to Frau Lippheim, and tomorrow I shall go to Cornwall. I shall tell Mrs. Barker to pack my clothes and send them to me there." "You have no money." "Frau Lippheim will lend me money. My guardian will take care of me. It is not for you to have any thought for me." He dropped her arm. "Very well, go then," he said. He turned from her. He heard that she paused, the knob of the door in her hand. "Good-bye," she then said. Again it was, inconceivably, the mingled childishness, callousness, and considerateness, that at the moment she could think of the formality, suffocated him. "Good-bye," he replied, not looking round. The door opened and closed. He heard her swift feet passing down the passage to their room. She was not reckless. She needed her hat and coat at least. Quiet, rational determination was in all her actions. Yet, as he waited to hear her come out again, A hope that he knew to be chimerical rose in him. She would, perhaps, return, throw herself in his arms, and, weeping, say that she loved him and could not leave him. Gregory's heart beat quickly. But when he heard her footsteps again, they were not returning. They passed along to the kitchen. She was speaking to Mrs. Barker. Gregory had a shoot of surface thought for Mrs. Barker's astonishment. They entered the hall again. The hall door closed behind them. Gregory stood looking at the Buddha. The tears kept mounting to his throat and eyes, and furiously he choked them back. He did not see the Buddha. But suddenly, becoming aware of the bland, contemplative gaze of the great bronze image, his eyes fixed themselves on it. He had known it from the first to be an enemy. Its presage was fulfilled. The tidal wave had broken over his life. End of chapter 28. Chapter 29 of Tante. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Dion Johns, Salt Lake City, Utah. Tante by Anne Douglas Sedgwick. Chapter 29. Karen sat in her corner of the railway carriage, looking out at familiar scenery. Reading and the springtide beauties of the Thames Valley had gone by in the morning. Then, after the attendant had passed along the corridor announcing lunch, and those who were lunching had followed him in single file, had come the lonely majesty of the Somerset Downs, lying like great headlands along the plain, a vast sky of rippled blue and silver above them. They had passed Plymouth, where she had always used to look down from the high bridges and wonder over the lives of the midshipmen on the training ships, and now they were winding through wooded Cornish valleys. Karen had looked out of her window all day. She had not read, though kind Frau Lippheim had put the latest Tendes Roman, paper-bound, into the little basket, which was also stocked with stout beef sandwiches, a bottle of milk, and the packet of chocolate and bun in paper bag that Franz had added to it at the station. Poor Franz! He and his mother had come to see her off, and they had both wept as the train moved away. And strange indeed it must have been for them to see the Karen Jardine who, only yesterday, had been apparently so happy and so secure in her new life, carried back to the old, a wife who had left her husband. Karen had slept little the night before, and kind Franz must have slept less, for he had given her his meagre bedroom, and spent the night on the narrowest, hardest, most slippery of sofas in the sitting-room of the Bayswater lodging-house, where Karen had found the Lippheims very cheaply, very grimly, not to say greasily, installed. It was no wonder that Franz's eyes had been so heavy, his face so puffed and pale that morning, and his tears had given the last touch of desolation to his countenance. Karen herself had not wept, either at the parting or at the meeting of the night before. She had told them, with no explanations at all, that she had left her husband and was going back to her guardian, and the Lippheims had asked no questions. It might have been possible that Franz, as he sat at the table, his fingers run through his hair, clutching his head, while he and his mother listened to her, was not so dazed and lost as was Frau Lippheim, who had not seen Gregory. Franz might have his vague perceptions. "Ach, ach," he had ejaculated once or twice while she spoke. And Frau Lippheim had only said, "Lieb's kind, lieb's arms kind." She was, after all, going back to the great Tante, and they felt, no doubt, that no grief could be ultimate which had that compensatory refuge. She was going back to Tante. As the valleys, in their deepened shadows, streamed past her, Karen remembered that it had hardly been at all of Tante that she had thought, while the long hours passed and her eyes observed the flying hills and fields. Perhaps she had thought of nothing. The heavy feeling, as of a stone resting on her heart, of doom, defeat, and bitterness, could hardly have been defined as thought. She had thought and thought and thought during these last dreadful days. Every mental cog had been adjusted. Every wheel had turned. She had held herself together as never before in all her life, in order to give thought every chance. For wasn't that to give him every chance? And wasn't that, above all, to give herself any chance that might still be left her? And now the machinery seemed to lie wrecked. There was not an ember of hope left with which to kindle its activity. How much hope there must have been to have made it work so firmly and so furiously during these last days! How much she hadn't known until her husband had come in last night and at last spoken openly. Even Mrs. Forrester's revelations, though they had paralyzed her, had not put out the fires. She had still hoped that he could deny, explain, recant, own that he had been hasty, perhaps mistaken, give her some loophole. She could have understood, to a degree almost abject, his point of view. Mrs. Forrester had accused her of that, and Tante had accused her of it too. But no, it had been slowly to freeze to stillness, to hear his clear, cold utterance of shameful words, see the folly of his arrogance and his complacency, realize in his glacial look and glib, ironic smile that he was blind to what he was destroying in her. For he could not have torn her heart to shreds and then stood bland, unaware of what he had done, had he loved her. Her young spirit, unversed in irony, drank in the bitter draught of disillusion. They had never loved each other, or worse, far worse, they had loved, and love was this puny thing that a blow could kill. His love for her was dead. She still trembled when the ultimate realization surged over her, looking fixedly out of the window lest she should weep aloud. She had only one traveling companion, an old woman who got out at Plymouth. Karen had found her curiously repulsive, and that was one reason why she had kept her eyes fixed on the landscape. She had been afraid that the old woman would talk to her, perhaps offer her refreshments or sympathy, for she was a kind old woman, with bland eyes and a moist, warm face and 2 oily curls hanging forward from her old-fashioned bonnet upon her shoulders. She was stout, dressed in tight black cashmere, and she sat with her knees apart and her hands, gloved in gray thread gloves, lying on them. She held a handkerchief rolled into a ball, and from time to time, as if furtively, she would raise this handkerchief to her brow and wipe it. And all the time, Karen felt, she looked mildly and humbly at her and seemed to divine her distress. Karen was thankful when she got out. She had been ashamed of her antipathy. Bodmin Road was now past, and the early spring sunset shone over the treetops in the valleys below. Karen leaned her head back and closed her eyes. She was suddenly aware of her great fatigue, and when they reached Gwynear Road she found that she had been dozing. The fresh, chill air, as she walked along the platform, waiting for the change of trains, revived her. She had not been able to eat her beef sandwiches, and the thought that so much of Frau Lippheim's good food should be wasted troubled her. She was glad to find a little wandering fox terrier who ate the meat eagerly. She herself, sitting beside the dog, nibbled at Franz's chocolate. She had had nothing on her journey but the milk and part of the bun which Franz had given her. Now she was in the little local train, and the bleak Cornish country, nearing the coast, spread before her eyes like a map of her future life. She began to think of the future, and of Tante. She had not sent word to Tante that she was coming. She felt that it would be easiest to appear before her in silence, and Tante would understand. There need be no explanations. She imagined that Tante would find it best that she should live permanently now in Cornwall with Mrs. Talcott. It could hardly be convenient for her to take about with her a wife who had left her husband. Karen quite realized that her status must be a very different one from that of the unshadowed young girl. And it would be strange to take up the old life again and to look back from it at the months of life with Gregory. That mirage of happiness, receding as if to a blur of light seen over a stretch of desert. Still, with her quiet and unrevealing young face turned towards the evening landscape, Karen felt as if she had grown very old and were looking back, after a lifetime without Gregory, at the mirage. How faint and far it would seem to be when she was really old, like a nebulous star trembling on the horizon. But it would never grow invisible. She would never forget it. Oh, never! Nor the dreadful pain of loss. To the very end of life, she was sure of it, she would keep the pang of the shining memory. When they reached Helston, dusk had fallen. She found a carriage that would drive her the 12 miles to the coast. It was a quiet, grey evening, and as they jolted slowly along the dusty roads and climbed the steep hills at a snail's pace, she leaned back too tired to feel anything any longer. And now they were out upon the moors where the gorse was breaking into flowers, and now over the sea she saw at last the great beacon of the Lizard lighthouse sweeping the country with its vast, desolate, yet benignant beam. They reached the long road and the stile where, a year before, she had met Gregory. Here was the hedge of fuchsia, here the tamarisks on their high bank, here the entrance to Les Solitudes. The steeply pitched grey roofs rose before her, and the white walls, with their squares of orange light, glimmered among the trees. She alighted, paid the man, and rang. A maid, unknown to her, came to the door and showed surprise at seeing her there with her bag. Yes, Madame von Marwitz was within. Karen had entered with the asking. "Whom shall I announce, Madame?" the maid inquired. Karen looked at her vaguely. "She is in the music room? I do not need to be announced. That will go to my room." She put down the bag and crossed the hall. She was not aware of feeling any emotion, yet a sob had taken her by the throat, and tears had risen to her eyes. She opened them widely as she entered the dusky room, presenting a strange face. Madame von Marwitz rose from a distant sofa. In her astonishment, she stood still for a moment. Then, like a great, white, widely winged moth, she came forward, rapidly, yet with hesitant, reconnoitering pauses, her eyes on the girl who stood in the doorway, looking blindly towards her. "Karen!" she exclaimed sharply. "What brings you here?" "I have come back to you, Tante," said Karen. Tante stood before her, not taking her into her arms, not taking her hands. "Come back to me? What do you mean?" "I have left Gregory," said Karen. She was bewildered now. What had happened? She did not know, but it was something that made it impossible to throw herself into Tante's arms and weep. Then she saw that another person was with them. A man was seated on the distant sofa. He rose, wandering slowly down the room, and revealed himself in the dim light that came from the evening sky and sea as Mr. Claude Drew. Pausing at some little distance, he fixed his eyes on Karen, and in the midst of all the impressions, striking like chill, moulding blows on the melted iron of her mood, she was aware of these large, dark eyes of Mr. Drew's, and of their intent curiosity. The predominant impression, however, was of a changed aspect in everything, and as Tante, now holding her hands, still stood silent, also looking at her with intent curiosity, the impression vaguely and terribly shaped itself for her as a piercing question. Was Tante not glad to have her back? There came from Tante in another moment a more accustomed note. "You have left your husband? Because of me? My poor child?" Karen nodded. Mr. Drew's presence made speech impossible. "He made it too difficult for you?" Karen nodded again. "And you have come back to me," Madame von Marwitz summed it up, rather than inquired. And then, after another pause, she folded Karen in her arms. The piercing questions seemed answered, yet Karen could not now have wept. A dry, hard desolation filled her. "May I go to my room, Tante?" "Yes, my child, go to your room. You will find Tallie. Tallie is in the house, I think. Or did I send her into Helston? No, that was for tomorrow." She held Karen's hand at a stretch of her arm while she seemed, with difficulty still, to collect her thoughts. "But I will come with you myself. Yes, that is best. Wait here, Claude." This to the silent, dusky figure behind them. "Do not let me be a trouble." Karen controlled the trembling of her voice. "I know my way." "No trouble, my child, no trouble, or none that I am not glad to take." Tante had her now on the stair, her arm around her shoulders. "You will find us at 6s and 7s, a household hastily organized, but Tallie, directed by wires, has done wonders. So, my poor Karen, you have left him for good? Or is it only to punish him that you come to me?" "I have left him for good." "So," Madame von Marwitz repeated. With all the veils and fluctuations, one thing was growing clear to Karen. Tante might be glad to have her back, but she was confused, trying to think swiftly, to adjust her thoughts. They were in Karen's little room, overlooking the trees at the corner of the house. It was dismantled. A bare dressing table, the ewer upturned in the basin, the bed and its piled bedding covered with a sheet. Madame von Marwitz sat down on the bed and drew Karen beside her. "But is that not to punish him too much?" "It is not to punish him. I cannot live with him any longer." "I see, I see," said Madame von Marwitz, with a certain briskness, as though, still, to give herself time to think. "It might have been wiser to wait for a little. I would have written to you. We could have consulted. It is serious, you know, my Karen, very serious, to leave one's husband. I went away so this should not come to you." "I could not wait. I could not stay with him any longer," said Karen heavily. "There is more, you mean? You had words? He hates me more than you thought?" Karen paused and then assented. "Yes, more than I thought." Above the girl's head, which she held pressed down on her shoulder, Madame von Marwitz pondered for some moments. "Alas," she then uttered in a deep voice, and Karen saying nothing, she repeated on a yet more melancholy note, "Alas." Karen now raised herself from Tante's shoulder, but at the gesture of withdrawal Madame von Marwitz caught her close again and embraced her. "I feared it," she said. "I saw it. I hoped to hide it by my flight. My poor child, my beloved Karen." They held each other for some silent moments. Then Madame von Marwitz rose. "You are weary, my Karen. You must rest. Is it not so? I will send Tallie to you. You will see Tallie. She is a perfection of discretion. You do not shrink from Tallie. And you need tell her nothing. She will not question you. Between ourselves, is it not so? Yes, that is best, for the present. I will come again later. I have guests, a guest, you see. Rest here, my Karen." She moved towards the door. Karen looked after her. An intolerable fear pressed on her. She could not bear, in her physical weakness, to be left alone with it. "Tante!" she exclaimed. Madame von Marwitz turned. "My child?" "Tante, you are glad to have me back." Her pride broke in a sob. She hid her face in her hands. Madame von Marwitz returned to the bed. "Glad, my child?" she said. "For all the sorrow that it means? And to know that I am the cause? How can I be glad for my child's unhappiness?" She spoke with a touch of severity, as though in Karen's tears she felt an unexpressed accusation. "Not for that," Karen spoke with difficulty, "but to have me with you again. It will not be a trouble." There was a little silence, and then, her severity passing to melancholy reproof, Madame von Marwitz said, "Did we not, long since, speak of this, Karen? Have you forgotten? Can you so wound me once again? Only my child's grief can excuse her. It is a sorrow to see your life in ruins. I had hoped, before I died, to see it joyous and secure. It is a sorrow to know that you have maimed yourself, that you are tied to an unworthy man. But how could it be a trouble to me to have you with me? It is a consolation, my only consolation in this calamity. With me you shall find peace and happiness again." She laid her hand on Karen's head. Karen put her hand to her lips. "There, that is well," said Madame von Marwitz with a sigh, bending to kiss her. "That is my child. Tante is sad at heart. It is a heavy blow, but her child is welcome." When she had gone, Karen lay, her face in the billows of the bed, while she fixed her thoughts on Tante's last words. They became a sing-song monotone. "Tante is sad at heart, but her child is welcome. It is a heavy blow, but her child is welcome." After the anguish there was a certain ease. She rested in the given reassurance. Yet the sing-song monotone oppressed her. She felt presently that her hat, wrenched to one side and still fixed to her hair by its pins, was hurting her. She unfastened it and dropped it to the floor. She felt too tired to do more just then. Soon after this the door opened, and Mrs. Talcott appeared carrying a candle, a can of hot water, towels and sheets. Karen drew herself up, murmuring some vague words of welcome, and Mrs. Talcott, after setting the candle on the dressing table and the hot water in the basin, remarked: "Just you lie down again, Karen, and let me wash your face for you. You must be pretty tired and dirty after that long journey." But Karen put her feet to the ground. They just sustained her. "Thank you, Mrs. Talcott. I will do it," she said. She bent over the water, and while she washed, Mrs. Talcott, with deliberate skill, made up the bed. Karen sank in a chair. "You poor thing," said Mrs. Talcott, turning to her as she smoothed down the sheet. "Why, you're green. Sit right there and I'll undress you. Yes, you're only fit to be put to bed." She spoke with mild authority, and Karen, under her hands, relapsed to childhood. "This is all the baggage you've brought?" Mrs. Talcott inquired, finding a nightdress in Karen's dressing case. She expressed no surprise when Karen said that it was all, passed the nightdress over her head, and when she had lain down, tucked the bedclothes round her. "Now what you want is a hot water bottle and some dinner. I guess you're hungry. Did you have any lunch on the train?" "I've had some chocolate and a bun and some milk. Oh yes, I had enough," said Karen faintly, raising her hand to her forehead. "But I must be hungry, for my head aches so badly. How kind you are, Mrs. Talcott." "You lie right there and I'll bring you some dinner." Mrs. Talcott was swiftly tidying the room. "But what of yours, Mrs. Talcott? Isn't it your dinner time?" "I've had my supper. I have supper early these days." Karen dimly reflected, when she was gone, that this was an innovation. Whoever Madame von Marwitz's guests, Mrs. Talcott had, until now, always made an acte de présence at every meal. She was tired and not feeling well enough after her illness, she thought. Mrs. Talcott soon returned with a tray on which were set out hot consommé and chicken and salad, a peach beside them. Hot house fruit was never wanting when Madame von Marwitz was at Les Solitudes. "Lie back, I'll feed it to you," said Mrs. Talcott. "It's good and strong. You know Adolphe can make as good a consommé as anybody, if he's a mind to." "Is Adolphe here?" Karen asked as she swallowed the spoonfuls. "Yes, I sent for Adolphe to Paris a week ago," said Mrs. Talcott. "Mercedes wrote that she'd soon be coming with friends and wanted him. He'd just taken a situation, but he dropped it. Her new motor's here too, down from London. The chauffeur seems a mighty nice man, a sight nicer than Hammond." Hammond had been Madame von Marwitz's recent coachman. Mrs. Talcott talked on mildly while she fed Karen, who, in the whirl of trivial thoughts, turning and turning like midges over a deep pool, questioned herself, with a vague wonder that she was too tired to follow. "Did Tante say anything to me about coming to Cornwall?" Mrs. Talcott, meanwhile, as Madame von Marwitz had prophesied, asked no questions. "Now you have a good long sleep," she said, when she rose to go. "That's what you need." She needed it very much. The midges turned more and more slowly, then sank into the pool. Mist enveloped everything, and darkness. End of chapter 29. Chapter 30 of Tante. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Dion Johns, Salt Lake City, Utah. Tante by Anne Douglas Sedgwick. Chapter 30. Karen was waked next morning by the familiar sound of the Wohltemperirtes clavier. Tante was at work in the music room and was playing the prelude in D flat, a special favorite of Karen's. She lay and listened with a curious, cautious pleasure, like that with which, half awake, one may guide a charming dream, knowing it to be a dream. There was so much waiting to be remembered, so much waiting to be thought. Tante's beautiful notes, rising to her like the bubbles of a spring through clear water, seemed to encircle her, ringing her in from the wider consciousness. While she listened, she looked out at the branches of young leaves, softly stirring against the morning sky. There was her wallpaper, with the little pink flower creeping up it. She was in her own little bed. Tante was practicing. How sweet, how safe it was. A drowsy peace filled her. It was slowly that memory lapping in, like the sinister dark waters of a flood under doors and through crevices, made its way into her mind, obliterating peace, at first, rather than revealing pain. There was a fear, formless and featureless, and there was loss, dreadful loss, and as the sense of loss grew upon her, consciousness grew more vivid, bringing its visions. This hour of awakening. Gregory's eyes smiling at her. Not cold, not hard eyes then. His hand stretched out to hers, their morning kiss. Tears suddenly streamed down her face. It was impossible to hide them from Mrs. Talcott, who came in carrying a breakfast tray. But Karen checked them and dried her eyes. Mrs. Talcott set the tray down on the little table near the bed. "Is it late, Mrs. Talcott?" Karen asked. "It's just 9. Mercedes is up early so as to get some work in before she goes out motoring." "She is going motoring?" "Yes, she and Mr. Drew are going off for the day." Mrs. Talcott adjusted Karen's pillow. "But I shall see Tante before she goes?" It was the formless, featureless fear that came closer. "My, yes, you'll see her all right," said Mrs. Talcott. "She was asking after you the first thing, and hoped you'd stay in bed till lunch. Now you eat your breakfast right away like a good girl." Karen tried to eat her breakfast like a good girl, and the sound of the Wohltemperirtes clavier seemed again to encircle and sustain her. "How'd you sleep, honey?" Mrs. Talcott inquired. The term hardly expressed endearment, yet it was such an unusual one from Mrs. Talcott that Karen could only surmise that her tears had touched the old woman. "Very, very well," she said. "How'd you like me to bring up some mending I've got to do and sit by you till Mercedes comes?" Mrs. Talcott pursued. "Oh, please do, Mrs. Talcott," said Karen. She felt that she would like to have Mrs. Talcott there with her very much. She would probably cry unless Mrs. Talcott stayed with her, and she did not want Tante to find her crying. So Mrs. Talcott brought her basket of mending and sat by the window, sewing in silence for the most part, but exchanging with Karen now and then a quiet remark about the state of the garden and how the plants were doing. At 11 the sound of the piano ceased, and soon after the stately tread of Madame von Marwitz was heard outside. Mrs. Talcott, saying that she would come back later on, gathered up her mending as she appeared. She was dressed for motoring, with a long white cloak lined with white fur, and her head bound in nun-like fashion with a white coif and veil. Beautiful she looked, and sad and gentle, a succouring Madonna, and Karen's heart rose up to her. It clung to her and prayed, and the realization of her own need, her own dependence, was a new thing. She had never before felt dependence on Tante as anything but proud and glad. To pray to her now that she should never belie her loveliness, to cling to that faith in her without which all her life would be a thing distorted and unrecognizable, was not pride or gladness, and seemed to be the other side of fear. Yet so gentle were the eyes, so tender the smile, and the firm clasp of the hands taking hers, while Tante murmured, stooping to kiss her, "Good morning to my child," that the prayer seemed answered, the faith approved. If Madame von Marwitz had been taken by surprise the night before, if she had had to give herself time to think, she had now, it was evident, done her thinking. The result was this warmly cherishing tenderness. "Ah," she said, still stooping over Karen, while she put back her hair, "it is good to have my child back again. Mine, quite mine, once more." "I have slept so well, Tante," said Karen. She was able to smile up at her. Madame von Marwitz looked about the room. And now it is to gather the dear old life closely about her again. Gardening and reading, and quiet times with Tante and Tallie. Though for the moment I must be much with my guest. I am helping him with his work. He has talent, yes. It is a strange and complicated nature. You did not expect to find him here." Karen held Tante's hand, and her gaze was innocent of surmise. Mr. Drew had never entered her thoughts. "No. Yes. No, Tante. He came with you?" "Yes, he came with me," said Madame von Marwitz. "I had promised him that he should see Les Solitudes one day. I was glad to find an occupation for my thoughts in helping him. I told him that if he were free he might join me. It is good, in great sorrow, to think of others. Now it is, for the young man and for me, our work. Work, work. We must all work, ma chérie. It is our only clue in the darkness of life, our only nourishment in the desert places." Again she looked about the room. "You came without boxes?" "Yes, Mrs. Barker is to send them to me." "Ah, yes. When?" said Madame von Marwitz, in a lower voice. "Did you leave? Yesterday morning?" "No, Tante, the night before." "The night before? So. And where did you spend the night? With Mrs. Forrester? With Scrotton? I have not yet written to Scrotton." "No, I went to the Lippheims." "The Lippheims? So?" "The others, Tante, would have talked to me and questioned me. I could not have borne that. The Lippheims were so kind." "I can believe it. They have hearts of gold, those Lippheims. They would cut themselves in four to help one. And the good Lise? How is she? I am sorry to have missed Lise." "And she was, oh, so sorry to have missed you, Tante. She is well, I think, though tired. She is always tired, you remember. She has too much to do." "Yes, indeed. Poor Lise. She might have been an artist of the first rank if she had not given herself over to the making of children. Why did she not stop at Franz and Lotta and Minna? That would have given her the quartet." Madame von Marwitz smiled. She was in a mildly merry mood. "But on they go. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. How many are there? Bon Dieu! Of how many am I the godmother? One grows bewildered. It is almost a rat's family. Lise is not unlike a white mother rat, with the small round eye and the fat body." "Oh, not a rat, Tante," Karen protested, a little pained. "A rabbit, you think? And a rabbit, too, is prolific. No, for the rabbit has not the sharpness, not the pointed nose, the anxious eager look. Is not so the mother indeed? Rat it is, my Karen, and rat with a golden heart. How do you find Tallie? She has been with you all the morning? You have not talked with Tallie of our calamities?" "Oh, no, Tante." "She is a wise person, Tallie, wise, silent, discreet, and I find her looking well, but very, very well. This air preserves her. And how old is Tallie now?" she mused. Though she talked so sweetly, there was, Karen felt it now, a perfunctoriness in Tante's remarks. She was, for all the play of her nimble fancy, preoccupied, and the sound of the motor horn below seemed a signal for release. "Tallie is mon Dieu," she computed, rising. "She was 23 when I was born, and I am nearly 50. Madame von Marwitz was as far above cowardly reticences about her age as a timeless goddess. Tallie is actually 72. Well, I must be off, ma chérie. We have a long trip to make today. We go to Fowey. He wishes to see Fowey. I pray the weather may continue fine. You will be with us this evening? You will get up? You will come to dinner?" She paused at the mantelpiece to adjust her veil, and Karen, in the glass, saw that her eyes were fixed on hers with a certain intentness. "Yes, I will get up this morning, Tante," she said. "I will help Mrs. Talcott with the garden. But dinner? Mrs. Talcott says that she has supper now. Shall I not have my supper with her? Perhaps she would like that." "That would perhaps be well," said Madame von Marwitz. "That is perhaps well thought." Still she paused, and still in the glass she fixed cogitating eyes on Karen. She turned, then abruptly: "But no, I do not think so. On second thoughts, I do not think so. You will dine with us. Tallie is quite happy alone. She is pleased with the early supper. I shall see you then this evening." A slight irritation lay on her brows, but she leaned with all her tenderness to kiss Karen, murmuring, "Adieu, mon enfant." When the sound of the motor had died away, Karen got up, dressed, and went downstairs. The music room, its windows open to the sea, was full of the signs of occupancy. The great piano stood open. Karen went to it and, standing over it, played softly the dearly loved notes of the prelude in D flat. She practiced always on the upright piano in the morning room, but when Tante was at home and left the grand piano open, she often played on that. It was a privilege rarely to be resisted, and today she sat down and played the fugue through, still very softly. Then, covering the keys, she shut the lid and looked more carefully about the room. Flowers and books were everywhere. Mrs. Talcott arranged flowers beautifully. Karen recognized her skillful hand in the tall branches of budding green standing high in a corner, the glasses of violets, the bowls of anemones, and the flat dishes of Italian earthenware filled with primroses. On a table lay a pile of manuscript. She knew Mr. Drew's small, thick handwriting. A square silver box for cigarettes stood near by. It was marked with Mr. Drew's initials, in Tante's hand. How kind she was to that young man! But Tante had always been lavish with those of whom she was fond. Out on the veranda the vine tendrils were already green against the sky, and on a lower terrace she saw Mrs. Talcott at work, as usual, among the boarders. Mrs. Talcott, then, had not yet gone to Helston, and she would not be alone, and she was glad of that. In the little cupboard near the pantry she found a pair of old gardening gloves and her own old gardening hat. The day was peaceful and balmy. All was as it had always been, except herself. She worked all the morning in the garden, and walked in the afternoon on the cliffs with Victor. Victor had come down with Tante. Mrs. Talcott had adjourned the trip to Helston, so they had tea together. Her boxes had not yet come, and when it was time to dress for dinner, she had nothing to change to but the little white silk with the flat blue bows upon it, the dress in which Gregory had first seen her. She had left it behind her when she married, and found it now hanging in a cupboard in her room. The horn of the returning motor did not sound until she was dressed, and on going down she had the music room to herself for nearly half an hour. Then Mr. Drew appeared. The tall white lamps with their white shades had been brought in, but the light from the windows mingled a pale azure with the gold. Mr. Drew, Karen reflected, looked in the dual illumination like a portrait by Besnard. He had certainly an unusual and an interesting face, and it pleased her to verify and emphasize this fact, for accustomed as she was to watching Tante's preoccupations with interesting people, she could not quite accustom herself to her preoccupation with Mr. Drew. To account for it, he must be so very interesting. She was not embarrassed by conjectures as to what, after her entry of last night, Mr. Drew might be thinking about her. It occurred to her no more than in the past to imagine that anybody attached to Tante could spare thought to her. And as in the past, despite all the inner desolation, it was easy to assume to this guest of Tante's the attitude so habitual to her of the attendant in the temple. The attendant who, rising from his seat at the door, comes forward tranquilly to greet the worshipper and entertain him with quiet comment until the goddess shall descend. "Did you have a nice drive?" she inquired. "The weather has been beautiful." Mr. Drew, coming up to her as she stood in the open window, looked at her with his impenetrable melancholy eyes, smiling at her a little. There was no tastelessness in his gaze, nothing that suggested a recollection of what he had heard or seen last night, yet Karen was made vaguely aware from his look that she had acquired some sort of significance for him. "Yes, it's been nice," he said. "I'm very fond of motoring. I'd like to spend my days in a motor, always going faster and faster, and then drop down in a blissful torpor at night. Madame von Marwitz was so kind and made the chauffeur go very fast." Karen was somewhat disturbed by this suggestion. "I am sure that she too would like going very fast. I hope you will not tempt her." "Oh, but I'm afraid I do," Mr. Drew confessed. "What is the good of a motor unless you go too fast in it? A motor has no meaning unless it's a method of intoxication." Karen received the remark with inattention. She looked out over the sea, preoccupied with the thought of Tante's recklessness. "I do not think that going so fast can be good for her music," she said. "Oh, but yes," Mr. Drew assured her. "Nothing is so good for art as intoxication. Art is rooted in intoxication. It's all a question of how to get it." "But with motoring you only get torpor, you say," Karen remarked. And going on with her own train of thoughts, "So much shaking will be bad, perhaps, for the muscles. And there is always the danger to consider. I hope she will not go too fast. She is too important a person to take risks." There was no suggestion that Mr. Drew should not take them. "Don't you like going fast? Don't you like taking risks? Don't you like intoxication?" Mr. Drew inquired, and his eyes traveled from the blue bows on her breast to the blue bows on her elbow sleeves. "I have never been intoxicated," said Karen calmly. She was quite accustomed to all manner of fantastic visitors in the temple. "I do not think that I should like it, and I prefer walking to any kind of driving. No, I do not like risks." "Ah, yes, I can see that. Yes, that's altogether in character," said Mr. Drew. He turned then, as Madame von Marwitz came in, but remained standing in the window while Karen went forward to greet her guardian. Madame von Marwitz, as she took her hands and kissed her, looked over Karen's shoulder at Mr. Drew. "Why did you not come to my room, chérie?" she asked. "I had hoped to see you alone before I came down." "I thought you might be tired and perhaps resting, Tante," said Karen, who had, indeed, paused before her guardian's door on her way down, and then passed on with a certain sense of shyness. She did not want in any way to force herself on Tante. "But you know that I like to have you with me when I am tired," Madame von Marwitz returned. "And I am not tired. No, it has been a day of wings." She walked down the long room, her arm around Karen, with a buoyancy of tread and demeanour in which, however, Karen, so deep an adept in her moods, discovered excitement rather than gaiety. "Has it been a good day for my child?" she questioned. "A happy, peaceful day? Yes? You have been much with Tallie?" "I told Tallie that she must postpone the trip to Helston so that she might stay with you." Tante on the sofa encircled her and looked brightly at her. Yet her eyes swerved to the window where Mr. Drew remained looking at a paper. Karen said that she had been gardening and walking. "Good! Bravo!" said Tante, and then in a lower voice, "No news, I suppose?" "No, oh no, that could not be, Tante," said Karen with a startled look, and Tante went on quickly, But no, I see, it could not be. And it has, then, been a happy day for my Karen? What is it you read, Claude?" Karen's sense of slight perplexity in regard to Tante's interest in Mr. Drew was deepened when she called him Claude, and her tone now, half vexed, half light, was perplexing. "Some silly things that are being said in the house," Mr. Drew returned, going on reading. "What things?" said Tante sharply. "Oh, you wouldn't expect me to read a stupid debate to you," said Mr. Drew, lifting his eyes with a smile. Dinner was announced, and they went in, Tante keeping her arm around Karen's shoulders and sweeping ahead with an effect of unawareness as to her other guest. She had perhaps a little lost her temper with him, and his manner was, Karen reflected, by no means assiduous. At the table, however, Tante showed herself suave and sweet. One reason why things seemed a little strange, Karen further reflected, was that Mrs. Talcott came no longer to dinner, and she was vaguely sorry for this. End of chapter 30. Chapter 31 of Tante. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Dion Gines, Salt Lake City, Utah. Tante by Anne Douglas Sedgwick. Chapter 31. Karen's boxes arrived next day, neatly packed by Mrs. Barker, and not only her clothes were in them. She had left behind her the jewel box with the pearl necklace that Gregory had given her, the pearl and sapphire ring, the old enamel brooch and clasp and chain, his presents all. The box was kept locked and in a cupboard of which Gregory had the key, so that he must have given it to Mrs. Barker. The photographs, too, from their room, not those of him, but those of Tante, of her father, and a dozen little porcelain and silver trinkets from the drawing room, presents and purchases particularly hers. It was right, quite right, that he should send them. She knew it. It was right that he should accept their parting as final. Yet that he should so accurately select and send to her everything that could remind him of her seemed to roll the stone before the tomb. She looked at the necklace, the ring, all the pretty things, and shut the box. Impossible that she should keep them, yet impossible to send them back, as if in a bandying of rebuffs. She would wait for some years to pass, and then they should be returned without comment. And the clothes, all these dear clothes of her married life. Every dress and hat was associated with Gregory. She could never wear them again. And it felt not so much that she was locking them away as that Gregory had locked her out into darkness and loneliness. She took up the round of the days. She practiced, she gardened, she walked and read. Of Tante she saw little. She was accustomed to seeing little of Tante, even when Tante was there, quite accustomed to Tante's preoccupations. Yet through the fog of her own unhappiness it came to her, like an object dimly perceived, that in this preoccupation of Tante's there was a difference. It showed itself in a high-pitched restlessness, verging now and again on irritation, not with her, Karen, but with Mr. Drew. To Karen she was brightly, punctually tender, yet it was a tenderness that held her away rather than drew her near. Karen did not need to be put aside. She had always known how to efface herself. She needed no atonement for the so apparent fact that Tante wanted to be left alone with Mr. Drew as much as possible. The difficulty in leaving her came with perceiving that though Tante wanted her to go, she did not want to seem to want it. She caressed Karen. She addressed her talk to her. She kept her. Yet under the smile of the eyes there was an intentness that Karen could interpret. It devolved upon her to find the excuse, the necessity for withdrawal. Mrs. Talcott in the morning room was a solution. Karen could go to her almost directly after dinner, as soon as coffee had been served. For on the first occasion when she rose, saying that she would have her coffee with Mrs. Talcott, Tante said with some sharpness, after a hesitation, "No, you will have your coffee here. Tallie does not have coffee." Groping her way, Karen seemed to touch strange forms. Tante cared so much about this young man, so much that it was almost as if she would be willing to abandon her dignity for him. It was more than the indulgent, indolent interest, wholly Olympian, that she had so often seen her bestow. She really cared. And the strangeness for Karen was in part made up of pain for Tante, for it almost seemed that Tante cared more than Mr. Drew did. Karen had seen so many men care for Tante, so many who were obviously in love with her, but she had seen Tante always throned high above the prostrate adorers, idly kind, holding out a hand, perhaps, for them to kiss, smiling from time to time if they fortunately pleased her, but never, oh never, stepping down towards them. It seemed to her now that she had seen Tante stepping down. It was only a step. She could never become the suppliant, the pursuing goddess, and as if with her hand still laid on the arm of her throne, she kept all her air of high command. But had she kept its power? Mr. Drew's demeanor reminded Karen sometimes of a cat's. Before the glance and voice of authority he would, metaphorically, pace away, pausing to blink up at some object that attracted his attention, or to interest himself in the furbishing of flank or chest. At a hint of anger or coercion, he would tranquilly disappear. Tante, controlling indignation, was left to stare after him and to regain the throne as best she might. And at these moments, Karen felt that Tante's eye turned on her, gauging her power of interpretation, ready, did she not feign the right degree of unconsciousness, to wreak on her something of the controlled emotion. The fear that had come on the night of her arrival pressed closely on Karen then, but more closely still, the pain for Tante. Tante's clear dignity was blurred. Her image, in its rebuffed and ineffectual autocracy, became hovering, uncertain, piteous, and in seeing and feeling all these things, as if with a lacerated sensitiveness, Karen was aware that, in this last week of her life, she had grown much older. She felt herself in some ways older than her guardian. It was on the morning of her 7th day at Les Solitudes that she met Mr. Drew walking early in the garden. The sea was glittering blue and gold. The air was melancholy in its sweetness. Birds whistled. Karen examined Mr. Drew as he approached her along the sunny upper terrace. With his dense, dark eyes, delicate face, and golden hair, his white clothes and loose black tie, she was able to recognize in him an object that might charm and even subjugate. To Karen he seemed but one among the many strange young men she had seen surrounding Tante. Yet this morning, clearly, and for the first time, she saw why he subjugated Tante, and why she resented her subjugation. There was more in him than mere pose and peculiarity. He had some power, the power of the cat. He was sincerely indifferent to anything that did not attract him. And at the same time he was unimportant, insignificant in all but his sincerity. He was not a great writer. Tante could never make a great writer out of him. And he was, when all was said and done, but one among many strange young men. "Good morning," he said. He doffed his hat. He turned and walked beside her. They were in full view of the house. "I hoped that I might find you. Let us go up to the flagged garden," he suggested. "The sea is glittering like a million scimitars. One has a better view up there." "But it is not so warm," said Karen. "I am walking here to be in the sun." Mr. Drew had also been walking there to be in the sun, but they were in full view of the house, and he was aware of a hand at Madame von Marwitz's window curtain. He continued, however, to walk beside Karen up and down the terrace. "I think of you," he said, "as a person always in the sun. You suggest glaciers and fields of snow and meadows full of flowers, the sun pouring down on all of them. I always imagine Apollo as a Norse god. Are you really a Norwegian?" Karen was, as we have said, accustomed to young men who talked in a fantastic manner. She answered placidly, "Yes, I am half Norwegian." "Your name, then, is really yours? Your untamed yet intimate name? It is like a wild bird that feeds out of one's hand." "Yes, it is really mine. It is quite a common name in Norway." "Wild birds are common," Mr. Drew observed, smiling softly. He found her literalness charming. He was finding her altogether charming. From the moment that she had appeared at the door in the dusk, with her white, blind, searching face, she had begun to interest him. She was stupid and delightful, a limpid and indomitable young creature who, in a clash of loyalties, had chosen, without a hesitation, to leave the obvious one. Also, she was married, yet unawakened, and this, to Mr. Drew, was a preeminently charming combination. The question of the awakened and the unawakened, of the human attitude to passion, preoccupied him, practically, more than any other. His art dealt mainly in themes of emotion as an end in itself. The possibilities of passion in Madame von Marwitz, as artist and genius, had strongly attracted him. He had genuinely been in love with Madame von Marwitz. But the mere woman, as she more and more helplessly revealed herself, was beginning to oppress and bore him. He had amused himself of late by imaging his relation to her in the fable of the sun and the traveller. Her beams from their high, sublime solitudes had filled him with delight and exhilaration. Then the radiance had concentrated itself, had begun to follow him, rather in the manner of stage sunlight, very unflaggingly. He had wished for intervals of shade. He had been aware, even during his long absence in America, of sultriness brooding over him, and now, at these close quarters, he had begun to throw off his cloak of allegiance. She bored him. It wasn't good enough. She pretended to be sublime and far, but she wasn't sublime and far. She was near and watchful and exacting, as watchful and exacting as a mistress, and as haughty as a Diana. She was not, and had evidently no intention of being, his mistress, and for the mere pleasure of adoring her, Mr. Drew found the price too high to pay. He did not care to proffer, indefinitely, a reverent passion, and he did not like people, when he showed his weariness, to lose their tempers with him. Already Madame von Marwitz had lost hers. He did not forget what she looked like, nor what she said on these occasions. She had mentioned the large-mouthed children at Wimbledon, facts that he preferred to forget as much as possible, and he did not know that he forgave her. There was a tranquil malice in realizing that as Madame von Marwitz became more and more displeasing to him, Mrs. Jardine, more and more, became pleasing. A new savour had come into his life since her appearance, and he had determined to postpone a final rupture with his great friend and remain on for some time longer at Les Solitudes. He wondered if it would be possible to awaken Mrs. Jardine. "Haven't I heard you practising once or twice lately?" he asked her now, as they turned at the end of the terrace and walked back. "Yes," said Karen, "I practise every morning." "I'd no idea you played too." "It is hardly a case of two, is it?" Karen said, mildly amused. "I don't know. Perhaps it is. One may look at a Memling after a Michelangelo, you know. I wish you'd play to me." "I am no Memling, I assure you." "You can't until I hear you. Do play to me. Brahms, a little Brahms." "I have practised no Brahms for a long time. I find him too difficult. I heard you doing a Bach prelude yesterday. Play that." "Certainly, if you wish it, I will play it to you," said Karen, "though I do not think that you will much enjoy it." Mrs. Talcott was in the morning room over accounts, so Karen went with the young man into the music room and opened the grand piano there. She then played her prelude, delicately, carefully, composedly. She knew Mr. Drew to be musicianly. She did not mind playing to him. More and more Mr. Drew reflected, looking down at her, she reminded him of flower-brimmed, inaccessible mountain slopes. He must discover some method of ascent, for the music brought her no nearer. He was aware, indeed, that it removed her. She quite forgot him as she played. The last bars had been reached, when the door opened suddenly and Madame von Marwitz appeared. She had come in haste, that was evident, and a mingled fatigue and excitement was on her face. Her white cheeks had soft, sodden depressions, and under her eyes were little pinches in the skin, as though hot fingers had nipped her there. She looked almost old, and she smiled a determined, adjusted smile, with heavy eyes. "Tiens, tiens," she said, and turning elaborately, she shut the door. Karen finished her bars and rose. "This is a new departure," said Madame von Marwitz. She came swiftly to them, her loose lace sleeves flowing back from her bare arms. "I do not like my piano touched, you know, Karen, unless permission is given. No matter, no matter, my child. Let it not occur again, that is all. You have not found the right balance of that phrase." She stooped and reiterated with emphasis a fragment of the prelude. "And now I will begin my work, if you please. Tallie waits for you, I think, in the garden, and would be glad of your help. Tallie grows old. It does not do to forget her." "Am I to go into the garden too?" Mr. Drew inquired, as Madame von Marwitz seated herself and ran her fingers over the keys. "I thought we were to motor this morning." "We will motor when I have done my work. Go into the garden by all means, if you wish to." "May I come into the garden with you? May I help you there?" Mr. Drew serenely drawled, addressing Karen, who, with a curious concentrated look, stood gazing at her guardian. She turned her eyes on him, and her glance put him far, far away, like an object scarcely perceived. "I am not going into the garden," she said. "Mrs. Talcott is working in the morning room and does not need me yet." "Ah, she is in the morning room," Madame von Marwitz murmured, still not raising her eyes and still running loud and soft scales up and down. Karen left the room. As the door closed upon her, Madame von Marwitz, with a singular effect of control, began to weave a spider's web of intricate, nearly impalpable sound. "Go, if you please," she said to Mr. Drew. He stood beside her, placid. "Why are you angry?" he asked. "I am not pleased that my rules should be broken. Karen has many privileges. She must learn not to take, always, the extra inch when the ell is so gladly granted." He leaned on the piano. Her controlled face, bent with absorption above the lacy pattern of sound that she evoked, interested him. "When you are angry and harness your anger to your art like this, you become singularly beautiful," he remarked. He felt it. And after all, if he were to remain at Les Solitudes and attempt to scale those Alpine slopes, he must keep on good terms with Madame von Marwitz. "So," was her only reply, yet her eyes softened. He raised the lace wing of her sleeve and kissed it, keeping it in his hand. "No foolishness, if you please," said Madame von Marwitz. "Of what have you and Karen been talking?" "I can't get her to talk," said Mr. Drew, "but I like to hear her play." "She plays with right feeling," said Madame von Marwitz. "She is not a child to express herself in speech. Her music reveals her more truly. Nur wo du bist sei alles immer kindlich." Mr. Drew mused. "This is what she makes me think of." With anybody of Madame von Marwitz's intelligence, frankness was far more likely to allay suspicion than guile, and for very pride now She was forced to seem reassured. "Yes, that is so," she said, and she continued to play. End of chapter 31. Chapter 32 of Tante. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Dion Gines, Salt Lake City, Utah. Tante by Anne Douglas Sedgwick. Chapter 32. Karen, meanwhile, made her way to the cliff path, and seating herself on a grassy slope, she clasped her knees with her hands and gazed out over the sea. She was thinking hard of something, and trying to think only of that. It was true, the permission had been that she was to play on the grand piano when it was left open. There had been no rule set. It had not been said that she was not to play at other times, and indeed on many occasions she had played unrebuked before Tante came down. But the thing to remember now, with all her power, was that technically Tante had been right. To hold fast to that thought was to beat away a fear that hovered about her like a horrible bird of prey. She sat there for a long time, and she became aware at last that though she held so tightly to her thought, it had, as it were, become something lifeless, inefficacious, and that fear had invaded her. Tante had been unkind, unjust, unloving. It was as though, in taking refuge with Tante, she had leaped from a great height, seeing security beneath, and as though, alighting, she slipped and stumbled on a sloping surface with no foothold anywhere. Since she came, there had been only this sliding, and now it seemed to be down to unseen depths. For this was more and worse than the first fear of her coming. Tante had been unkind, and she so loved Mr. Drew that she forgot herself when he bestowed his least attention elsewhere. Karen rose to her feet suddenly, aware that she was trembling. She looked over the sea, and the bright day was dreadful to her. Where was she, and what was she, and what was Tante, if this fear were true? Not even on that far day of childhood, when she had lost herself in the forest, had such a horror of loneliness filled her. She was a lost, an unwanted creature. She turned from the unanswering immensities and ran down the cliff path towards Les Solitudes. She could not be alone. To think these things was to feel herself drowning in fear. Emerging from the higher trees, she caught sight below her of Mrs. Talcott's old straw hat moving among the borders, and in the midst of the emptiness, the sight was strength and hope. The whole world seemed to narrow to Mrs. Talcott. She was secure and real. She was a spar to be clung to. The nightmare would reveal itself as illusion if she kept near Mrs. Talcott. She ran down to her. Mrs. Talcott was slaying slugs. She had placed pieces of orange peel around cherished young plants to attract the depredators, and she held a jar of soot. Into the soot the slugs were dropped as she discovered them. The sight of her was like a draught of water to parching lips. Reality slowly grew round Karen once more. Tante had been hasty, even unkind, but she was piteous, absorbed in this great devotion, and Tante loved her. She walked beside Mrs. Talcott and helped her with the slugs. "Been out for a walk, Karen?" Mrs. Talcott inquired. They had reached the end of the border and moved on to a higher one. "Only to the cliff," said Karen. "You look kind of tired," Mrs. Talcott remarked, and Karen owned that she felt tired. "It's so warm today," she said. "Yes, it's real hot. Let's walk under the trees." Mrs. Talcott took out her handkerchief and wiped her large, saffron-colored forehead. They walked slowly in the thin shadow of the young foliage. "You're staying on for a while, aren't you?" Mrs. Talcott inquired presently. She had as yet asked Karen no question, and Karen felt that something in her own demeanour had caused this one. "For more than a while," she said. "I am not going away again." In the sound of the words she found a curious reassurance. Was it not her home, Les Solitudes? Mrs. Talcott said nothing for some moments, stooping to nip a drooping leaf from a plant they passed. Then she questioned further, "Is Mr. Jardine coming down here?" "I have left my husband," said Karen. For some moments Mrs. Talcott again said nothing, but she no longer had an eye for the plants. Neither did she look at Karen. Her gaze was fixed before her. "Is that so?" was at last her comment. The phrase might have expressed amazement, commiseration, or protest. Its sound remained ambiguous. They had come to a rustic bench. "Let's sit down for a while," she said. "I'm not as young as I was." They sat down, the old woman heavily, and she drew a sigh of relief. Looking at her, Karen saw that she too was very tired, and she too, was it not strange that today she should see it for the first time, was very lonely. A sudden pity, profound and almost passionate, filled her for Mrs. Talcott. "You'll not mind having me here for all the time now, again, will you?" she asked, smiling a little, with determination, for she did not wish Mrs. Talcott to guess what she had seen. "No," said Mrs. Talcott, continuing to gaze before her and shaking her head. "No, I'll be glad of that. We get on real well together, I think." And after another moment of silence she went on in the same contemplative tone. "I used to quarrel pretty bad with my husband when I was first married, Karen. He was the nicest, mildest kind of man, as loving as could be. But I guess most young things find it hard to get used to each other all at once. It ain't easy, married life, at least not at the beginning. You expect such a high standard of each other, and everything seems to hurt. After a while you get so discouraged, perhaps finding it isn't like what you expected, that you commence to think you don't care any more and it was all a mistake. I guess every young wife thinks that in the first year, and it makes you feel mighty sick. Why, if marriage didn't tie people up so tight, most of 'em would fly apart in the first year and think they just hated each other, and that's why it's such a good thing that they're tied so tight. Why, I remember once the only thing that seemed to keep me back was thinking how Homer was my husband's name, Homer G. Talcott, sort of snorted when he laughed. I was awful mad with him, and it seemed as if he'd behaved so mean and misunderstood me so that I'd got to go. But when I thought of that sort of childish snort he'd give sometimes, I felt I couldn't leave him. It's mighty queer, human nature, and the teeny things that seem to decide your mind for you. I guess they're not as teeny as they seem. But those hurt feelings are almost always a mistake. I'm pretty sure of it. And two people find it hard to live together and get used to each other. It don't make any difference how much in love they are. There was no urgency in Mrs. Talcott's voice and no pathos of retrospect. Its contemplative placidity might have been inviting another sad and wise old woman to recognize these facts of life with her. Karen's mood, while she listened to her, was hardening to the iron of her final realization, the realization that had divided her and Gregory. "It isn't so with us, Mrs. Talcott," she said. "He has shown himself a man I cannot live with. None of our feelings are the same. All my sacred things he despises." "Mercedes, you mean?" Mrs. Talcott suggested after a moment's silence. "Yes, and more." Karen could not name her mother. Mrs. Talcott sat silent. "Has Tante not told you why I was here?" Karen presently asked. "No," said Mrs. Talcott. "I haven't had a real talk with Mercedes since she got back. Her mind is pretty well taken up with this young man." To this Karen, glancing at Mrs. Talcott in a slight bewilderment, was able to say nothing, and Mrs. Talcott pursued, resuming her former tone. "There's another upsetting thing about marriage, Karen, and that is that you can't expect your families to feel about each other like you feel. It isn't in nature that they should. and that's one of the things that young married people can't make up their minds to. Now, Mr. Jardine isn't the sort of young man to care about many people. Few and far between they are, I should infer, and Mercedes ain't one of them. Mercedes wouldn't appeal to him one mite. I saw that as plain as could be from the first." "He should have told me so," said Karen, with her rocky face and voice. "Well, he didn't tell you he found her attractive, did he?" "No. But though I saw that there was blindness, I thought it was because he did not know her. I thought that when he knew her he would care for her. And I could forgive his not caring. I could forgive so much. But it is worse, far worse than that. He accuses Tante of dreadful things. It is hatred that he feels for her. He has confessed it." The color had risen to Karen's cheeks and burned there as she spoke. "Well, now!" Mrs. Talcott imperturbably ejaculated. "You can see that I could not live with a man who hated Tante," said Karen. "What sort of things, for instance?" Mrs. Talcott took up her former statement. "How can I tell you, Mrs. Talcott? It burns me to think of them." "Hypocrisy in her feeling for me. Selfishness and tyranny and deceit. It is terrible. In his eyes she is a malignant woman." "Tut, tut!" Mrs. Talcott made an indeterminate cluck with her tongue. "I struggled not to see," said Karen, and her voice took on a sombre energy. "And Tante struggled too, for me. She too saw from the very first what it might mean. She asked me on the very first day that they met, Mrs. Talcott, when she came back, she asked me to try and make him like her. She was so sweet, so magnanimous." Her voice trembled. Oh, the deep relief, so deep that it seemed to cut like a knife, of remembering, pressing to her, what Tante had done for her, endured for her. So sweet, so magnanimous, Mrs. Talcott. She did all that she could, and so did I, to give him time. For it was not that I lacked love for my husband. No, I loved him. More, even more, than I loved Tante. There was perhaps the wrong. I was perhaps cowardly for his sake. I could not see. And it was all useless. It grew worse and worse. He was not rude to her. It was not that. It was worse. He was so careful, oh, I see it now, not to put himself in the wrong. He tried, instead, to put her in the wrong. He misread every word and look. He sneered, oh, I saw it and shut my eyes, at her little foibles and weaknesses. Why should she not have them as well as other people, Mrs. Talcott? And he was blind, blind, blind. Karen's voice trembled more violently, to all the rest, so that it had to end. And she went on in broken sentences. Tante went because she could bear it no longer, and because she saw that I could bear it no longer. She hoped, by leaving me, to save my happiness. But that could not be. Mrs. Talcott, even then I might have tried to go on living with that chasm between Tante and my husband in my life, but I learned the whole truth as even I hadn't seen it, as even she hadn't seen it. Mrs. Forrester came to me, Mrs. Talcott, and told me what Gregory had said to her of Tante. He believes her a malignant woman, said Karen, repeating her former words and rising as she spoke. And to me he did not deny it. Everything then was finished for us. We saw that we did not love each other any longer. She stood before Mrs. Talcott in the path, her hands hanging at her sides, her eyes fixed on the wall above Mrs. Talcott's head. Mrs. Talcott did not rise. She sat silent, looking up at Karen, and so for some moments they said nothing, while in the spring sunshine about them the birds whistled and an early white butterfly dipped and fluttered by. "I feel mighty tired, Karen," Mrs. Talcott then said. Her eyelid with the white mole twitched over her eye. The lines of her large, firm old mouth were relaxed. Karen's eyes went to her and pity filled her. "It is my miserable story," she said. "I am so sorry." "Yes, I feel mighty tired," Mrs. Talcott repeated, looking away and out at the sea. "It's discouraging. I thought you were fixed up all safe and happy for life." "Dear Mrs. Talcott," said Karen, earnestly, "I don't like to see things that ought to turn out right turning out wrong," Mrs. Talcott continued, "and I've seen a sight too many of them in my life. Things turning out wrong that were meant to go right. Things spoiled. People, nice, good people, like you and Mr. Jardine, all upset and miserable. I've seen worse things too." Mrs. Talcott slowly rose as she spoke. "Yes, I've seen about as bad things happen as can happen, and it's always been when Mercedes is about." She stood still beside Karen, her bleak, intense old gaze fixed on the sea. Karen thought that she had misheard her last words. "When Tante is about?" she repeated. "You mean that dreadful things happen to her? That is one of the worst parts of it now, Mrs. Talcott, only that I am so selfish that I did not think of it enough to know that I have added to Tante's troubles." "No," Mrs. Talcott now said, and with a curious mildness and firmness. "No, that ain't what I mean. Mercedes has had a sight of trouble. I don't deny it. But that ain't what I mean. She makes trouble. She makes it for herself, and she makes it for other people. There's always trouble going, of some sort or other, when Mercedes is about." "I don't understand you, Mrs. Talcott," said Karen. An uncanny feeling had crept over her while the old woman spoke. It was as if, helplessly, she were listening to a sleepwalker who, in tranced unconsciousness, spoke forth mildly the hidden thought of his waking life. "No, you don't understand yet," said Mrs. Talcott. "Perhaps it's fair that you don't. Perhaps she can't help it. She was born so, I guess." Mrs. Talcott turned and walked toward the house. The panic of the cliff was rising in Karen again. Mrs. Talcott was worse than the cliff and the unanswering immensities. She walked beside her, trying to control her terror. "You mean, I think," she said, "that Tante is a tragic person, and people who love her must suffer because of all that she has had to suffer?" "Yes, she's tragic, all right," said Mrs. Talcott. "She's had about as bad a time as they make 'em, off and on. But she spoils things, and it makes me tired to see it going on. I've had too much of it," said Mrs. Talcott. "And if this can't come right, this between you and your nice young husband, I don't feel like I could get over it somehow." Leaning on Karen's arm with both hands, she had paused and looked intently down at the path. "But Mrs. Talcott," Karen's voice trembled. It was incredible, yet one was forced by Mrs. Talcott's whole demeanor to ask the question without indignation. "You speak as if you were blaming Tante for something. You do not blame her, do you?" Mrs. Talcott still paused and still looked down, as if deeply pondering. "I've done a lot of thinking about that very point, Karen," she said, "and I don't know as I've made up my mind yet. It's a mighty intricate question. Perhaps we've all got only so much willpower, and when most of it is ladled out into one thing, there's nothing left to ladle out into the others. That's the way I try, sometimes, to figure it out to myself. Mercedes has got a powerful sight of willpower, but look at all she's got to use up in her piano playing. There she is, working up to the last notch, all the time, taking it out of herself, getting all wrought up. Well, to live so as you won't be spoiling things for other people needs about as much willpower as piano playing, I guess, when you're as big a person as Mercedes and want as many things. And if you ain't got any willpower left, you just do the easiest thing. You just take what you've a mind to. You just let yourself go in every other way to make up for the one way you held yourself in. That's how it is, perhaps." "But Mrs. Talcott," said Karen in a low voice, "all this, about me and my husband, has come because Tante has thought too much of us and too little of herself. It would have been much easier for her to let us alone and not try to make Gregory like her. I do not recognize her in what you are saying. You are saying dreadful things." "Well, dreadful things have happened, I guess," said Mrs. Talcott. "I want you to go back to your nice husband, Karen." "No, no, never. I can never go back to him," said Karen, walking on. "Because he hates Mercedes?" "Not only that. No, he is not what I thought. Do not ask me, Mrs. Talcott. We do not love each other any longer. It is over." "Well, I won't say anything about it then," said Mrs. Talcott, who, walking beside her, kept her hand on her arm. "Only I liked Mr. Jardine. I took to him right off, and I don't take to people so easy. And I take to you, Karen, more than you know, I guess. And I'll lay my bottom dollar there's some mistake between you and him, and that Mercedes is the reason of it." They had reached the house. "But wait," said Karen, turning to her. She laid both her hands on the old woman's arm while she steadied her voice to speak this last thought. "Wait. You are so kind to me, Mrs. Talcott, but you have made everything strange and dreadful. I must ask you one question, Mrs. Talcott. You have been with Tante all her life. No one knows her as you do. Tell me, Mrs. Talcott, you love Tante?" They faced each other at the top of the steps, on the veranda, and the young eyes plunged deep into the old eyes, passionately searching. For a moment Mrs. Talcott did not reply. When she did speak, it was decisively, as if, while recognizing Karen's right to ask, Karen must recognize that the answer must suffice. "I'd be pretty badly off if I didn't love Mercedes. She's all I've got in the world." End of chapter 32. Chapter 33 of Tante. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Dion Gines, Salt Lake City, Utah. Tante by Anne Douglas Sedgwick. Chapter 33. The sound of the motor, whirring skillfully among the lanes, was heard at 6, and shortly after Madame von Marwitz's return, Mrs. Talcott knocked at her door. Madame von Marwitz was lying on the sofa. Louise had removed her wraps and dress and was drawing off her shoes. Her eyes were closed. She seemed weary. "I'll see to Madame," said Mrs. Talcott, with her air of composed and unassuming authority. It was somewhat the air of an old nurse, sure of her prerogatives in the nursery. Louise went, and Mrs. Talcott took off the other shoe and fetched the white silk mules. Madame von Marwitz had only opened her eye for a glimmer of recognition, but as Mrs. Talcott adjusted a mule, she tipped it off and muttered gloomily, "Stockings, please. I want fresh stockings." There was oddity, as Mrs. Talcott found and came back with a pair of white silk stockings, in the sight of the opulent, middle-aged figure on the sofa, childishly stretching out first one large bare leg and then the other to be clothed, and it might have aroused in Mrs. Talcott a vista of memories, ending with the picture of a child in the same attitude, a child as idle and as autocratic. "Thank you, Tallie," Madame von Marwitz said, wearily but kindly, when the stockings were changed. Mrs. Talcott drew a chair in front of the sofa, seated herself, and clasped her hands at her waist. "I've come for a talk, Mercedes," she said. Madame von Marwitz now was sleepily observing her. "A talk? Bon Dieu! But I have been talking all day long." She yawned, putting a folded arm under her head, so that, slightly raising it, she could look at Mrs. Talcott more comfortably. "What do you want to talk about?" she inquired. Mrs. Talcott's eyes, with their melancholy, immovable gaze, rested upon her. "About Karen and her husband," she said. "I gathered from some talk I had with Karen today that you let her think you came away from London simply and solely because you'd had a quarrel with Mr. Jardine." Madame von Marwitz lay as if arrested by these words for some moments of an almost lethargic interchange, and then in an impatient voice she returned, What business is it of Karen's, pray, if I didn't leave London simply and solely on account of my quarrel with her husband? I had found it intolerable to be under his roof, and I took the first opportunity for leaving it. The opportunity happened to coincide with my arrangements for coming here. What has that to do with Karen?" "It has to do with her, Mercedes, because the child believes you were thinking about her, when, as a matter of fact, you weren't thinking about her or about anyone but this young man you've gotten so taken up with. Karen believes you care for her, something in the same way she does for you. And it's a sin and a shame, Mercedes." Mrs. Talcott spoke with no vehemence at all, of tone or look, but with decision. "A sin and a shame to let that child ruin her life because of you." Again Madame von Marwitz, now turning her eyes on the ceiling, seemed to reflect dispassionately. "I never conceived it possible that she would leave him," she then said. "I found him insufferable, and I saw that, unless I went, Karen would also come to see him as insufferable. To spare the poor child this, I came away. And I was amazed when she appeared here, amazed and distressed," said Madame von Marwitz. And after another moment she took up, "As for him, he has what he deserves." Mrs. Talcott eyed her. "And what do you deserve, I'd like to know, for going meddling with those poor happy young things? Why couldn't you let them alone? Karen's been a bother to you for years. Why couldn't you be satisfied at having her nicely fixed up, and let her tend to her own potato patch, while you tended to yours? You can't make me believe that it wasn't your fault, the whole thing, right from the beginning. I know you too well, Mercedes." Again Madame von Marwitz lay surprisingly still and surprisingly unresentful. It was as if, placidly, she were willing to be undressed, body or soul, by her old nurse and guardian. But after a moment, and with sudden indignation, she took up one of Mrs. Talcott's sentences. "A bother to me! I am very fond of Karen. I am devoted to Karen. I should much like to know what right you have to intimate that my feeling for her isn't sincere. My life proves the contrary. As for saying that it is my fault, that is merely your habit. Everything is always my fault with you." "It always has been, as far as I've been able to keep an eye on your tracks," Mrs. Talcott remarked. "Well, this is not. I deny it. I absolutely," said Madame von Marwitz, and now with some excitement, "deny it. Did I not give her to him? Did I not go to them with tenderest solicitude, and strive to make possible between him and me some relation of bare good fellowship? Did I not curb my spirit, and it is a proud and impatient one, as you know, to endure, lest she should see it, his veiled insolence and hostility? Oh, when I think of what I have borne with from that young man, I marvel at my own forbearance. I have nothing to reproach myself with, Tallie, nothing. And if his life is ruined, I can say, with my hand on my heart," Madame von Marwitz laid it there, "that he alone is to blame for it. A more odious, arrogant, ignorant being," she added, "I have never encountered. Karen is well rid of him." Mrs. Talcott remained unmoved. "You don't like him because he don't like you, and that's about all you've got against him, I reckon, if the truth were known," she said. "You can make yourself see it all like that if you've a mind to, but you can't make me. I know you too well, Mercedes. You were mad at him because he didn't admire you like you're used to being admired, and you went to work pinching and picking here and there, pretending it was all on Karen's account, but really so as you could get even with him. You couldn't stand their being happy all off by themselves without you. Why, I can see it all as plain and clear as if I'd been there right along. Just think of your telling that poor deluded child that you wanted her to make her husband like you. That was a nice way, wasn't it, for setting her heart at rest about you and him. If you didn't like him and saw he didn't like you, why didn't you keep your mouth shut? That's all you had to do, and keep out of their way all you could. If you'd been a stupid woman, there might have been some excuse for you. But you ain't a stupid woman, and you know precious well what you're about all the time. I don't say you intended to blow up the whole concern like you've done, but you wanted to get even with Mr. Jardine and show him that Karen cared as much for you as she did for him, and you didn't mind 2 straws what happened to Karen while you were doing it." Madame von Marwitz had listened, turning on her back, and with her eyes still on the ceiling, and the calm of her face might have been that of indifference or meditation. But now, after a moment of receptive silence, indignation again seemed to seize her. "It's false!" she exclaimed. "No, it ain't false, Mercedes, and you know it ain't," said Mrs. Talcott gloomily. "False, and absolutely false," Madame von Marwitz repeated. "How could I keep my mouth shut, as you delicately put it, when I saw that Karen saw? How keep my mouth shut without warping her relation to me? I spoke to her with lightest, most tender understanding, so that she should know that my heart was with her, while never dreaming of the chasms that I saw in her happiness. It was he who forced me to an open declaration, and he who forced me to leave. For how was happiness possible for Karen if I remained with them? No, he hated me, and was devoured by jealousy of Karen's love for me. I guess if it comes to jealousy, you've got enough for 2 in any situation. It don't do for you to talk to me about jealousy, Mercedes," Mrs. Talcott returned. "I've seen too much of you. You can't persuade me it wasn't your fault, not if you were to talk till the cows come home. I don't deny but what it was pretty hard for you to see that Mr. Jardine didn't admire you. I make allowances for that. But my gracious me," said Mrs. Talcott, with melancholy emphasis, "was that any reason for a big, middle-aged woman like you behaving like a spiteful child? Was it any reason for your setting to work to spoil Karen's life? No, Mercedes, you've done about as mean a thing as any I've seen you up to, and what I want to know now is what you're going to do about it." "Do about it?" Madame von Marwitz wrathfully repeated. "What more can I do? I open my house and my heart to the child. I take her back. I mend the life that he has broken. What more do you expect of me?" "Don't talk that sort of stage talk to me, Mercedes. What I want you to do is to make it possible so as he can get her back." "He is welcome to get her back if he can. I shall not stand in his way. It would be a profound relief to me were he to get her back." "I can see that well enough. But how'll you help standing in his way? The only thing you could do to get out of his way would be to help Karen be quit of you. Make her see that you're just as bad as he thinks you. I guess if you told her some things about yourself, she'd begin to see that her husband wasn't so far wrong about you. Par exemple," said Madame von Marwitz with a short laugh. She raised herself to give her pillow a blow, and turning on her side and contemplating more directly her ancient monitress, she said, "I sometimes wonder what I keep you here for." "I do too, sometimes," said Mrs. Talcott, "and I make it out that you need me." "I make it out," Madame von Marwitz repeated the phrase with a noble dignity of manner, "that I am too kind of heart, too aware of what I owe you in gratitude, to resent, as I have every right to do, the license you allow yourself in speaking to me." "Yes, you'll always get plain speaking from me, Mercedes," Mrs. Talcott remarked, "just as long as you have anything to do with me." "Indeed I shall. I am but too well aware of the fact," said Madame von Marwitz, "and I only tolerate it because of our lifelong tie." "You'll go on tolerating it, I guess, Mercedes. You'd feel mighty queer, I expect, if the one person in the world who knew you through and through and had stood by you through everything wasn't there to fall back on. "I deny that you know me through and through," Madame von Marwitz declared, but with a drop from her high manner, sulkily rather than with conviction. "You have always seen me with the eye of a lizard." Her simile amused her, and she suddenly laughed. "You have somewhat of the vision of a lizard, Tallie. You scrutinize the cracks and the fissures, but of the mountain itself you are unaware. I have cracks and fissures, no doubt, like all the rest of our sad humanity, but, bon Dieu, I am a mountain, and you, Tallie," she went on, laughing softly, "are a lizard on the mountain. As for Mr. Jardine, he is a mole. But if you think that Karen will be happier burrowing underground with him than here with me, I will do my best. Yes," she reflected, "I will write to Mrs. Forrester. She shall see the mole and tell him that when he sends me an apology, I send him Karen. It is a wild thing to leave one's husband like this. I will make her see it." "Now you see here, Mercedes," said Mrs. Talcott, rising and fixing an acute gaze upon her, "don't you go and make things worse than they are. Don't you go interfering between Karen and her husband. The first move's got to come from them. I don't trust you round the corner where your vanity comes in, and I guess what you've got in your mind now is that you'd like to make it out to your friends how you've tried to reconcile Karen and her husband after he's treated you so bad. If you want to tell Karen that he was right in all the things he believed about you, and that this isn't the first time by a long shot that you've wrecked people with your jealousy, and that he loves her 10 times more than you do, that's a different thing, and I'll stand by you through it. But I won't have you meddling any more with those 2 poor young things, so you may as well take it in right here." Madame von Marwitz's good humour fell away. "And for you, may I ask you kindly to mind your own business?" she demanded. "I'll make this affair of Karen's my business, if you ain't real careful, Mercedes," said Mrs. Talcott, standing solid and thick and black in the centre of the room. "Yes, you'd better go slow and sure, or you'll find there are some things I can't put up with. This affair of Karen has made me feel pretty sick, I can tell you. I've seen you do a sight of mean things in your life, but I don't know as I've seen you do a meaner. I guess," Mrs. Talcott continued, turning her eyes on the evening sea outside, "it would make all your friends sit up, all these folks who admire you so much, if they could know a thing or two you've done." "Leave the room," said Madame von Marwitz, now raising herself on her elbow and pointing to the door. "Leave the room at once. I refuse to lie here and be threatened and insulted and browbeaten by you. Out of my sight." Mrs. Talcott looked at the sea for a moment longer, in no provocative manner, but rather as if she had hardly heard the words addressed to her. And then she looked at Mercedes, who, still raised on her elbow, still held her arm very effectively outstretched. This, too, was no doubt a scene to which she was fully accustomed. "All right," she said, "I'm going." She moved towards the door. At the door she halted, turned, and faced Madame von Marwitz again. "But don't you forget, Mercedes Okraska," she said, "that I'll make it my affair if you ain't careful." End of chapter 33.